Chapter 804. Li Nanheng continued to communicate with the people in the headset. The headset was connected to the base's command hall and several other helicopters. Whenever new instructions were sent from the base, he would need to immediately make an accurate judgment and issue orders to the people on the other helicopters. At this moment, everyone on the helicopter wore solemn and calm expressions. No one cared who was the newcomer and who was the instructor. Feng Ling found that she was unable to help at all. However, she continued to sit at the back with her back straight. She listened intently to every single word Li Nanheng spoke. The whistling sea breeze blew past her ears, blowing her short hair. She raised her hand and brushed her hair aside. She thought to herself that short hair was indeed the cleanest. Otherwise, her hair would definitely affect her movements and vision when she was in a helicopter. Sitting in the back seat, the loud sound of the propeller was almost all Feng Ling could hear. She had to lean forward and spend a lot of effort to catch all the orders Li Nanheng gave into the headset. Han Jin and Xiao Fei, who were seated in the front row, were both wearing soundproof headsets. Nanheng glanced at the south, where they were about to reach the mission destination. He turned back to look at Feng Ling, who had been sitting at the back the entire time, and turned to instruct Xiao Fei. Xiao Fei turned back to look at Feng Ling. He pointed to the headset on his head and shouted at Feng Ling, "Put on the headset." Feng Ling had never participated in such an operation before. She thought that the headsets on the plane were limited and that she would not be given one. After hearing Xiao Fei's words, she turned back and searched for a while behind her seat. When she saw the headset hanging on the back of her seat, she pulled it over and put it on. Finally, the soundproof headset blocked out the loud sound of the propellers. Her world also instantly quietened down. All that could be heard was the faint sound of electricity in the headset. Maintaining communication with the scouts in the base's command hall. Currently, Mr. Ted's family of 3 has been quickly moved. They have been forcefully brought to a large private cruise near the seaside of the mission point. The cruise has already set off for the sea. We need a group of people to surround the enemy at the mission point and another group to rescue them on the cruise. Otherwise, it is likely that the Ted family will be killed on the cruise. Base rescue team on plane 5, please report your current location. Han Jin's voice came from the headset. The rescue team has received it. The U.S. military has already arranged for a rescue ship to be in the waters near the mission point in advance, but in order not to alert the enemy, they have delayed approaching. We will immediately arrange for the rescue ship to arrive quickly. We are behind plane 1 at 7:00. The estimated landing time is 3 minutes later than plane 1. The person in charge of the rescue team answered from the plane behind. Sure enough, he could hear everything clearly after putting on the earphones. Although Han Jin was a strict instructor in Team 1, he was very approachable in private. It had been some time since Feng Ling left Team 1. She had stayed in the sniper team for such a long time, and it had been a long time since she heard Han Jin speak in such a serious tone. After another minute of silence in the headset, Nanheng's voice suddenly came again. Plane 7, report the progress of the tracking signal. Feng Ling's breathing paused slightly. She raised her head to look at the man sitting in the front passenger seat. While operating the position tracker specially installed by the base, he spoke in a steady voice based on Plane 7's short reply. The target mission location has already appeared in our field of vision. Plane 5, head to the sea for rescue. Planes 7 and 8, circle in the air and await further orders. The rest of you, hover in the direction of the target location at 3:30. Have a radius of 7 meters and an altitude of 10 meters. The terrorists below had already sensed the approaching danger and had moved Mayor Ted's family of 3 to the sea. From afar, they could see the huge white private cruise ship heading towards the center of the sea. The 7 helicopters approached the most dangerous mission point, which was filled with explosives, and began to descend. While descending, the rescue team from Plane 5 had already flown towards the sea. Looking from afar, they suddenly saw a large amount of black smoke rising from the cruise ship. The smoke spread into the sky, and gradually, a faint glow of fire could be seen on the cruise ship. Initially, they could only see a white cruise ship. When the helicopters descended to a certain altitude, the flames on the cruise ship became more and more obvious. The flames on the cruise ship could be seen clearly. Ted's family of 3, with an ignorant 3-year-old child by their side. Just like that, they had been kidnapped for so many days. And now, on their way out, the terrorists intended to throw them into the sea and let them perish on the burning cruise ship. Looking in that direction, Nanheng suddenly raised his hand to indicate for Han Jin to stop the helicopter on the other side. After descending, he removed his headset and turned back to look at Feng Ling. In the base, you and Xiao Fei are the best swimmers. If anything happens to that family of 3 on the cruise ship, I'm afraid the rescue team won't be able to save them. They have a child by their side and will need to personally board the cruise ship to bring them down. You and Xiao Fei will cooperate with the sea rescue. Leave this to us. But boss, there are so many terrorists lying in ambush here. Our base didn't send out many people to begin with. Now that Feng Ling and I are being sent over. Xiao Fei frowned. Boss, I'm not sure if you're going to kill us or not. Time is tight. I don't have time to listen to your nonsense. Just listen to my arrangements, Nanheng said mildly. Nanheng calmly said, our first objective today is to rescue Ted and his family. Don't forget whose younger brother Ted is. Our second objective is to face those violent criminals. With so many people here, you two won't make much of a difference. Hurry and head over. In the base's conference room last night, Feng Ling had already heard about the landmines and ambushes around the mission point. Although the people dispatched for this mission were all elites of the base, it was too dangerous. Now that so many people had been transferred away, she felt that it was only right for her to help out at the front lines and not head over to the cruise ship. She removed her headset and was about to speak when Xiao Fei directly stood up and opened the cabin door. At the same time, he said, Boss's words are in order. At any critical moment, you must listen to Boss's arrangements. Feng Ling, come down with me. Feng Ling paused for a moment before turning to look at Nanheng. The latter directly tossed 2 life jackets to her and said coldly, I know you're a good swimmer and don't need these things. Put them on first in case you need them. Feng Ling did not speak. She picked up the life jackets and held them in her arms. When she saw that Xiao Fei had already jumped down, she also jumped down. The entire process took less than 2 minutes. After she and Xiao Fei had retreated several meters, the helicopter in front of them took off once more. This time, it flew directly toward the mission point that was only 200 to 300 meters away. Chapter 805. Feng Ling followed Xiao Fei and sped towards the sea. A rescue helicopter had already approached and was slowly descending. At the same time, the military's rescue vehicle and rescue boat had also reached the vicinity of the sea. The cruise ship had already sailed for over 2,000 meters. The fire on the cruise ship was spreading rapidly. Initially, they could only see thick black smoke and a few sparks of fire. By the time the rescue helicopter descended to a certain height, the flames at the stern of the cruise ship could be seen more clearly. A few of the terrorists escorting Ted's family directly jumped into the sea from the bow of the ship, attempting to escape successfully through the surface of the sea. However, Ted's family did not appear. It was likely that they had been tied up in the cabin of the cruise ship, awaiting death. The military's rescue boat cooperated with the rescue helicopter and prepared to approach. However, the wind and waves were too strong. Both boats were swaying violently, making it difficult for them to approach. At this moment, the captain of the rescue team's helicopter sounded through the earpiece, "Report, the wind and waves are too strong. We are unable to board the cruise ship to rescue them. The rescue team has requested to release an inflatable raft. Please inform the military's rescue team to put on all life-saving equipment. Our team members will be using the ship's rescue method. We need to bring them out before the fire spreads." The base's main hall immediately sent out a notification to the rescue boat sent by the military. Feng Ling and Xiao Fei had already boarded the nearest rescue boat. Since the boat was unable to approach, the two of them stared unwaveringly in the direction of the cruise ship, awaiting their next orders. Very quickly, an orange-red inflatable raft that could accommodate more than 10 people was released from the rescue boat. 2 rescue team members alighted from the helicopter and laid down on the raft. Their hands paddled as they attempted to approach the smoking cruise ship. Currently, no one could be seen outside the cabin of the cruise ship. However, Ted's family was still inside. No one knew what the situation was. Feng Ling and Xiao Fei sat on the other inflatable raft that the military rescue boat had placed below and began to approach the cruise ship. The entire process lasted for about 2 to 3 minutes. Finally, the inflatable raft neared the cruise ship. Everyone quickly climbed up the edge of the raft, grabbing onto anything that could be used to push themselves up. Successfully, they climbed onto the smoking cruise ship. The rescue team's plane was still hovering in the sky, on standby. After all, with this kind of fire, if the plane continued to approach it, it would only cause unnecessary danger. Feng Ling, Xiao Fei, and the members of the rescue team put on fire and gas masks to block the thick smoke. They split into 4 directions and rushed toward the front door and the sides of the large cabin. The cruise ship had 6 floors, and each floor was about 300 to 400 square meters. It would take a lot of effort to find someone in such thick smoke. After Feng Ling entered, she directly rushed upstairs. The rest of them started from the first floor and went up step by step. They had to open every corner and place that could hide people. When she reached the 5th floor, Feng Ling suddenly paused. She turned to see a huge wooden box placed on the balcony of the cruise ship not far away. It was almost engulfed by the thick smoke. Feng Ling paused and abruptly rushed over. She kicked aside the chains on the wooden box and abruptly opened the heavy lid. As expected, the Ted family of 3 were trapped inside. A man, a woman, and a 3-year-old child were all tied up. Their heads were covered with a layer of black cloth. The 3 of them had already been suffocated by the thick smoke on the cruise ship and did not even have the strength to struggle. When the black cloth was abruptly removed, the first person to open her eyes was the woman in her 30s. She should be the mayor's wife. When the woman saw Feng Ling, her eyes were filled with fear. She then turned to look at the thick smoke and fire outside. The fear in her eyes turned to plead for help. She glanced at Feng Ling and then at the frightened child who was choking on the thick smoke and had tears in his eyes. The desire to survive in her eyes was even more obvious than the thick smoke around them. "Don't be afraid, I'm here to save you." Feng Ling spoke fluent English to the mayor's wife. At the same time, she quickly pulled off the black tape that was stuck on the mouths of the family of 3. The moment the mayor's wife regained her freedom, she immediately screamed at the top of her lungs, "Save us, we don't want to die, save the child, don't worry, we're from 11 base. We'll definitely ensure your safety." Feng Ling comforted her as she swiftly cut the ropes on the child's body. She then cut the ropes on the mayor's wife and the mayor's body. What happened to him? Seeing that the mayor was unconscious and only his wife and child were still conscious, Feng Ling carried the child out of the box and asked. "After we were kidnapped, my husband was constantly beaten up by those terrorists. He was already injured. When he was brought onto the cruise ship, his head was smashed and he has been unconscious ever since." Mayor Ted's wife's eyes were filled with tears as she struggled to stand up from the box. When she saw that her child was in the arms of this young man who had rushed over to save them, she looked gratefully at Feng Ling. She reached out to help the motionless mayor up from the box with Feng Ling. "Feng Ling?" At this moment, the rescue team had rushed up to the 5th floor. After hearing the commotion, the 2 people who had arrived first immediately rushed over. "Quick, help Mayor Ted down first. He's still unconscious. The thick smoke is too fatal." As Feng Ling spoke, she removed the gas mask from her head and placed it on the head of the child who was crying non-stop. She then turned to glance at the mayor's wife. "Our men will carry Mayor Ted away first. Can you still walk?" The mayor's wife frantically nodded at her. Her eyes were still nervously fixed on the child in Feng Ling's arms. It was clear that she wanted to leave with Feng Ling and the child. She did not wish to be separated from the child. 2 members of the rescue team carried the mayor, who weighed over 100 kilograms, out. Feng Ling carried the crying child in her arms as she gestured for the mayor's wife to follow her. When the 2 brought the child downstairs, Xiao Fei rushed over. "How is it? Is there anyone else up there?" "No, there's only their family of 3. Mayor Ted is currently unconscious. His wife and child are still relatively conscious," Feng Ling said as she continued to walk out. "If the cruise continues to burn, the oil tanks will explode." In order to prevent the mayor's wife from receiving any further shock, Xiao Fei spoke in a soft voice that only Feng Ling could hear. Chapter 806. However, just as Xiao Fei was being urged by Feng Ling to get off the cruise ship and onto the inflatable raft, an accident happened. At that moment, the flames from the back of the cruise had already spread to the front of the ship. The entire cruise was about to be engulfed by the flames. Only the mayor's wife remained on the deck with a nervous expression on her face and Feng Ling, who was carrying her wailing child. The mayor's wife looked at the flames behind her and cried out for help in a panic. However, she did not dare to jump into the sea. She was afraid that she would not be able to make it onto the inflatable raft and that she would be killed if she jumped into the sea. Thick smoke rose into the air, choking the mayor's wife as she coughed and cried. Accompanied by the hoarse cries of a 3-year-old child, Feng Ling felt as though her entire world was about to explode from her crying. The flames grew stronger and the inflatable raft was unable to get too close to the cruise. As time passed, the inflatable raft had to move further back. Otherwise, it would not be able to carry anyone due to the flames. Seeing that the mayor's wife refused to jump into the water despite her cries, Feng Ling furrowed her brows and shouted harshly, "Jump! Jump! No! I don't dare, jump if you want to live. Hurry, I'm afraid, if this place continues to burn, neither the 2 of us nor this child will be able to survive. Do you know how large the oil tank is on such a large cruise? Do you know that if the oil tank explodes, we will all be blasted into nothingness? Hurry and jump!" Feng Ling shouted angrily, "Jump!" Seeing that the mayor's wife continued to cry and shake her head, Feng Ling angrily held onto her child with one hand and pushed her off with the other. However, the mayor's wife held onto the railing with all her might. She did not dare to jump down no matter what. She screamed, "I don't know how to swim. I'm afraid of water. I'm very afraid. I don't dare. Hurry and jump." Xiao Fei, who was on the inflatable raft, could not hear their voices. He did not know why they had not jumped down after such a long delay. As a result, the inflatable raft that was supposed to catch them was forced to move further and further away. It was almost out of the safe distance. "Jump!" Feng Ling glared at her impatiently. "Do you want to die?" As she spoke, she took off her life jacket and wrapped it around the child in her arms. Without thinking too much, she threw the child in her arms down. Mayor Ted's wife screamed the moment she saw her child being thrown down. In the helicopter above, no one knew what the people below were talking about, but Xiao Fei's furious voice came through the earpiece. The trapped people refused to jump into the sea. The wind and waves are too strong, and the fire is spreading too fast. The inflatable raft can't get any closer. Request to board the ship and rescue. As Xiao Fei spoke, he reached out to catch the child who had just been thrown down. The child was wearing the life jacket Feng Ling had given him on the boat. The moment he fell to the surface of the sea, Xiao Fei quickly rushed over to catch him. He didn't let the child choke on the water and directly brought him onto the inflatable raft. At this moment, the rescue team member on the helicopter looked down and frowned. "This won't do. The fire is too strong. We can't board the ship in time. It's going to explode." The next moment, the voice of the rescue team member connected to the second-line communication device on the other side sounded in the headset, "Boss, the trapped people on the cruise ship refuse to jump down, and Feng Ling is still on it. If we continue to waste time, I'm afraid the risk will be very high. All the rescue ships and helicopters nearby will be affected by the explosion. Although Feng Ling was also wearing an earpiece, she could not clearly hear what was being said on the cruise. She could only vaguely hear the sound of electricity. She seemed to hear Li Nanheng's voice, but at the same time, it seemed like she did not hear anything. Even she was about to see stars from the thick smoke, let alone the mayor's wife who was crying by the side. All of a sudden, Feng Ling seemed to hear some movement. She abruptly raised her head to look ahead. The rescue team's helicopter was approaching without hesitation. She instantly frowned. What were they trying to do? Right now, they clearly knew the ship was about to explode. In order to ensure the safety of the other team members, shouldn't they be flying to a safe distance? Why were they suddenly approaching? Following that, she saw the bottom of the helicopter open. A rope ladder was lowered down. The rescue team leader personally climbed down the rope ladder. Feng Ling was stunned. She pulled off her earpiece and looked in the direction where the helicopter was approaching. The helicopter hovering right above the fire was affected by the high heat and emitted a loud noise. The propellers continued to spin rapidly, and the rope ladder swayed violently in the air. The rescue team leader quickly climbed down. After reaching the bottom, he successfully approached Feng Ling and the mayor's wife. Quick! Come here. Feng Ling paused for a moment. She knew that they were here to save her. However, she did not forget her mission. The person who did not dare to jump into the sea was the mayor's wife. If this continued and the mayor's wife died, this mission would be considered a failure. She abruptly tugged on the mayor's wife's hand and handed it to the rescue team leader. The rescue team leader only glanced at Feng Ling. He did not need to ask to understand Feng Ling's intentions. Without any objections, he helped the mayor's wife up the rope ladder. The rope ladder could only take one person at a time. Seeing that someone had already successfully climbed up, the helicopter quickly flew away for everyone's safety. The rescue team leader and the mayor's wife were still hanging at the bottom of the rope ladder. However, at the very least, they had already left the explosion zone. Feng Ling directly tugged off the earpiece that could no longer be used due to the high heat and threw it down. As Qiao Fei continuously shouted for her to jump, she abruptly leaped into the sea. Just a second and a half after Feng Ling jumped down, the cruise ship's oil tank instantly erupted with a fiery red cloud. A series of violent explosions rang out behind Feng Ling. The moment she landed on the surface of the sea, Feng Ling felt a violent, scorching force from behind her. She felt a sharp pain in her chest and a metallic taste gushed out from her throat. Accompanied by Qiao Fei's heart-wrenching cry, Feng Ling lost control and fell straight into the sea. The moment she entered the icy surface of the sea, Feng Ling instinctively wanted to swim up, but the intense pain in her back and chest left her with no strength to move. Qiao Fei's inflatable raft had also been affected by the explosion. However, he had already successfully sent the child onto the military's rescue boat. He turned to look at the spot where Feng Ling had fallen into the sea. He wanted to place another inflatable raft down to save her but was stopped by the military. At the same time, they stopped him from jumping down. They reminded him, "You can't use the inflatable raft anymore. It will cause a chain of explosions. The sea has already been affected. You can't jump, but Feng Ling is still down there. She was injured by the explosion. Let go, dash." Chapter 807. You can't jump down. After the oil tank exploded, the oil inside is still on the surface of the sea. It will still be burning for a long time. We can't be sure if there will be a second explosion. The people on the rescue boat pressed down on Qiao Fei. Don't jump. No. Feng Ling has already been injured by the explosion. Right now, he can't swim out on his own. If we delay any longer, he will die. Let go. Let go. Calm down, Feng Ling is a member of our base and a member of our sniper team. Nothing can happen to him. Xiao Fei angrily pushed the people behind him away. Without saying another word to them, he directly jumped down and headed toward the raging flames on the surface of the sea. Not far away, on the helicopter, the mayor's wife was finally dragged up from the rope ladder. They placed her in the helicopter and began comforting her. However, at this moment, the captain of the rescue team glanced in the direction of the raging flames on the surface of the sea. He frowned and asked, "Can we still get closer?" The member in the cockpit replied sternly, "Captain, we can't go any closer. Earlier, we took the risk to approach, causing the oil tank of the helicopter to be affected. Right now, it's in a highly heated state. Just listen to the loud noises coming from the helicopter. If we get any closer, our helicopter will also explode. But Feng Ling is down there. Have you all forgotten what boss said earlier? When the mission ends, not a single person can be left behind. Everyone must return alive. Especially Feng Ling, who is a member of the sniper team and a member of boss's training. If he dies in this rescue mission, even if our mission is completed, it will still be a failure. Quick, think of a way to save him." But the flames on the surface of the sea are still gathering. We really can't get any closer. When the captain of the rescue team heard this, he abruptly put on his headset. He frowned and reported the current situation to boss, who was currently fighting with the terrorists. The area where Feng Ling had fallen into the sea was only 2 to 3 kilometers away from the shore. Although it was not deep into the sea, it was definitely at least 70 to 80 meters deep. Those who did not know how to swim would definitely lose their lives here. Feng Ling was a good swimmer, but at this moment, the bones in her body felt as though they were about to fall apart and reform. She was in so much pain that she couldn't move at all. As she sank into the cold seawater, she closed her eyes and felt a terrible sense of suffocation that made her feel an inexplicable fear. She didn't know where this fear came from, and she had never felt that she was afraid of water. But at this moment, an indescribable feeling drowned her like cold seawater layer by layer. However, when she closed her eyes and instinctively waited for death, Li Nanheng's figure inexplicably popped up in her mind. It was as though Li Nanheng was standing in front of her, looking at her sternly and coldly, saying to her, "Swim up." Only the weak would give up their last chance of survival. Swim up. Feng Ling furrowed her brows. Her fingers subconsciously moved, but she discovered that she could not move at all. Xiao Fei was indeed a good swimmer. Because there was a large amount of oil and fire on the surface of the sea, he directly swam in Feng Ling's direction. From afar, he could see Feng Ling's body sinking rapidly. Xiao Fei swam forward in one swoop and reached out to hold Feng Ling's waist. He directly held her tightly in his arms. Under the sea, and because of the oil and fire, it was temporarily impossible to tell which direction to go. He could only forcefully bring Feng Ling to swim in a temporarily safe direction. When they finally broke the surface of the sea, Xiao Fei held Feng Ling with one hand and used the other to forcefully wipe his face. He took 2 deep breaths and turned to look at Feng Ling, who was weakly leaning against him. The body of the youth in his arms was unbelievably soft. Xiao Fei furrowed his brows and called out to Feng Ling. Seeing that there was no reaction, he knew that Feng Ling had inhaled too much smoke and choked on water. His lungs were blocked and his breathing was affected. If they delayed any longer, they would really die. However, Xiao Fei turned to look at the position of the sea where he and Feng Ling were. Unknowingly, due to the momentum of the waves and the force of his own swimming, they were already very far away from the coastline. Those useless people who only watched but did not do anything had not driven their boats here in time. It was likely that they would not be able to find them in a short time. The rescue team of 11 base was hovering in the sky in the distance, trying their best to find traces of Feng Ling. But right now, Feng Ling's situation was not optimistic. Xiao Fei turned to look at how close they were to the coastline. Then he turned to look at an unknown island not far away. He did not know whether it was an island or a continent, but at least it was not in the deep sea. It should not take long for the rescue team to find it. Xiao Fei wiped his face hard again and directly held Feng Ling firmly. Just like this, he swam in the direction of the island with Feng Ling. With great difficulty, he finally brought Feng Ling onto the island. Right now, Xiao Fei had to immediately force out the water that Feng Ling had choked. At the same time, he had to perform CPR. He quickly unbuttoned Feng Ling's collar. Just as he unbuttoned the outer layer of her wet clothes, he saw the white collarbone exposed by the youngster. His movements paused for a moment before he continued to unbutton the next button. Suddenly, he saw the white breast-wrapping cloth inside. Just above the breast-wrapping cloth, there was a clear cleavage of a young girl's chest. Xiao Fei was completely stunned. Although he did not see any important parts, just the tightly wrapped breast-wrapping cloth and the vaguely visible cleavage on it, coupled with the fact that Feng Ling was clearly almost 17 years old but never had a single stubble on her face, as well as all the things that made people feel that she looked like a woman, all of this was confirmed in an instant. It turned out to be a woman, a woman, a woman. He knew that he was clearly not gay, but in the base, especially after joining the sniper team, he always felt an inexplicable urge to get close to Feng Ling. Indeed, opposites attracted. No matter how well she pretended to be a man. But at the end of the day, she was still a girl. Xiao Fei first stared in disbelief at the pale-faced Feng Ling lying on the shore of the island. He slowly digested the fact that Feng Ling was a woman. After being stunned for half a minute, he quickly returned to his senses. He unbuttoned her outer clothes again, but in the end, he did not dare to touch her breast-wrapping cloth. Just by looking at the young girl's fair and alluring shoulders, he already felt as though he was committing a crime. Saving her was more important. He could not care so much and directly pressed hard on her chest through the breast-wrapping cloth. Chapter 808. Feng Ling, Xiao Fei abruptly leaned down to her nose, feeling the frequency of her breathing and breathing. At the same time, he continued to apply pressure on her chest. Breathe, breathe hard, Feng Ling. Can you hear what I'm saying? Breathe hard, quick. Under Xiao Fei's efficient and standard CPR, Feng Ling furrowed her brows because of the pain from the pressure on her chest. More importantly, it was because she had choked on water and inhaled a large amount of smoke, causing her lungs to ache uncomfortably. Cough. She abruptly coughed once more, finally coughing out the remaining water. She instinctively sucked in a deep breath and then let out a long breath. She then coughed several times before reaching out to push Xiao Fei's hand away. She turned her body to face the person behind her and coughed violently. Cough, 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 cough. Feng Ling, how are you? Do you feel better? Can you breathe normally? Xiao Fei stood up and walked around her, reaching out to help her sit up. Cough. Feng Ling was slightly unconscious. She coughed a few more times before slowly opening her eyes. From the corner of her eyes, she saw the azure sea and the distant shoreline. She looked in that direction and took a deep breath after a long while. She said hoarsely, "I'm not dead, the cruise's oil tank exploded. Under normal circumstances, you should have died without a doubt. However, the cruise has been parked here for a long time. There isn't much oil in the oil tank, but the power of the explosion should have caused damage to your internal organs. When we return, we must immediately find a doctor to take a look." As Xiao Fei spoke, he raised a hand to wipe the sand and water off her face. At the same time, he pushed back the strands of hair covering her forehead and watched her pale face with concern. "How do you feel now?" Cough. Feng Ling coughed again. She wanted to speak, but she instinctively raised her hand to touch her aching chest. However, the moment she touched it, her expression faltered. She lowered her head to look at her combat uniform and the black shirt inside. Only the white chest wrapping cloth was wrapped around her body. She abruptly froze. Just as she was about to push him away, Xiao Fei sat firmly by her side and supported her slightly unstable body. "I'm sorry, I discovered your secret, but but I had no choice but to unbutton your clothes in order to save you. When I saw inside, I stopped, so I didn't see anything I shouldn't have seen. Feng Ling did want to push him away, but she didn't have the strength right now. She just sat there stiffly, raised her hands, and gripped the 2 layers of clothes tightly, covering her shoulders and collarbone. At the same time, she raised her eyes that were red from coughing and looked at him cautiously. Seeing her expression, Xiao Fei understood what she meant. You pretended to be a man because you wanted to stay in the base safely, didn't you? Feng Ling didn't speak, but her expression was very bad. But just now, Xiao Fei saved her life, so she couldn't say anything. Besides, he really didn't unbutton her clothes. CPR did require her to unbutton her clothes. Xiao Fei didn't do anything wrong. She didn't even have any reason to blame him. Don't worry, as long as you don't have any impure motives and don't do anything that will threaten the base, I won't tell anyone about this matter. Xiao Fei looked at her and thought of her excellent performance. A girl was actually more hardworking than a man. On one hand, he admired her, but on the other hand, his heart suddenly softened because of her. However, just now, he accidentally discovered this secret, so he was a little embarrassed. He said hoarsely, I swear, I really didn't see anything just now. Feng Ling closed her eyes and slowed down. Only she knew the way her chest wrapping cloth was wrapped. She also knew at a glance whether it had been undone or not. Xiao Fei didn't lie to her. Besides, Xiao Fei was the deputy drill master of the sniper team, which was equivalent to half a superior to her. Coupled with his promise earlier, she couldn't say anything more. Drill Master Xiao. Her voice was a little hoarse. At this moment, there was a burning pain in her chest, and she said hoarsely with some difficulty, I'm an orphan. I don't have parents, and I have nowhere to go. 11 Base is now a home for me. The base doesn't accept women, so I have no choice but to do this. Since you know now, I don't want to explain too much, but please keep it a secret for me. Xiao Fei looked at her for a while and nodded. All right, don't worry. I won't tell anyone. Right now, the most important thing is that you need to go to the hospital immediately. I think boss should be almost done with it. If he knows that we're missing, he will definitely come to take us away as soon as possible. You must hold on. Feng Ling nodded weakly. She had inhaled a lot of smoke on the cruise ship. That kind of smoke was very fatal. She had held on for so long, but in the end, when she needed fresh air the most, she fell into the sea and choked on a lot of water. She knew that her condition was very serious. If she didn't see a doctor, there would probably be a lot of sequelae, and she might even need to have a lung operation. But no matter what, at least her life was saved. At the moment when she fell into the sea, she didn't think that she could come back alive. But now that she had survived, she certainly wouldn't allow herself to die casually. This place is not far from the coastline. They will soon find us along the road. Let me help you find a comfortable place to sit for a while. Xiao Fei reached out to help Feng Ling up. There were several obvious reefs on the side of the island. After helping Feng Ling sit down, he also sat by the side. Feng Ling sat on the reef, fastening the buttons of her shirt with some difficulty while looking expressionlessly at the thick smoke that had yet to dissipate near the coastline in the distance. Seeing that Feng Ling seemed to be struggling to fasten the buttons, Xiao Fei knew that she was a woman and was embarrassed to touch her again. Earlier, when he helped her up, he didn't dare to hold her waist and only held her arm to help her to the reef. After all, this position was very obvious and could easily be discovered by the helicopter. Right now, you feel that your lungs hurt when you move, right? Do you want me to help you? Xiao Fei sat by the side and asked. Seeing that Feng Ling's movements paused, Xiao Fei coughed awkwardly and explained, in any case, I'm just helping you fasten the buttons and zipper. I don't have any impure thoughts. I just think that it's too strenuous for you to do it yourself. Chapter 809. Xiao Fei watched her. He saw that Feng Ling had been staring at the smoke-filled sky, but she did not speak. Actually, he had many questions he wanted to ask. For example, she was a young girl. How did she manage to survive in the all-male 11 base? After all, in the past, he was in Team 2 and was not in the same team as Feng Ling. He could only notice this beautiful and clean young man during training and some missions. At that time, he had a deep impression of her. Later, when he joined the sniper team, he paid special attention to her. At that time, he thought it was because this young man was too young and too outstanding, attracting his attention. Later on, he could not help but want to show concern for her or give her a few more pointers. He even thought that he was really interested in a beautiful man. But now, he finally confirmed that it was nothing more than the attraction of the opposite sex. No matter how well she dressed up as a man, she was still a woman in her bones. It was inevitable that he would be attracted to her. Right now, he could not imagine how a girl could survive in a place with so many men. There must be many inconveniences. How did she manage to survive? More importantly, she had not been discovered at all. It was one thing if others were confused, but how could the usually calm, decisive, and observant Boss Lee not discover it? But thinking about it, Boss Lee had been away for 2.5 years. He had only interacted with Feng Ling for 3 to 4 months. Their usual contact was only during training. It was not strange. What's the situation over there? Feng Ling looked in the direction of the coastline and asked hoarsely, "There are so many terrorists there. Are you sure there won't be any problems? We don't have many people, and there's an ambush. You should worry about yourself first. If the people in the base are wiped out because of these terrorists, then the two of us probably won't be able to leave this island in the short term. Firstly, you're injured. Secondly, there's still a long distance from here to the coastline. No matter how good you are in the water, you might not have the strength to swim back." Xiao Fei sighed with a smile. "In that case, we can only wait here to starve to death. And your lungs need to be taken care of. Staying here for too long won't do you any good." Feng Ling looked over quietly, raised her hand to touch her chest and lungs, and did not speak again. "Don't worry. Usually, Boss and Han Jin don't have many missions at the same time. It's rare for Boss to lead the team in person. There won't be any problem. The elites of the entire 11 base are here. If something can go wrong, then we can just cancel our base and go back to playing house." Xiao Fei said as he watched her touch her chest. "What's wrong? Is it very painful?" Feng Ling shook her head. "I'm fine. I'll be fine in a while." She was clearly still a young girl, but she was so calm and indifferent as if she shouldn't be at this age. Not to mention that she usually went through wind and rain, she still didn't have the slightest bit of complaint or cowardice. If it were any other ordinary girl, not to mention saving people, she would probably cry for her parents after falling into the sea for a while. Xiao Fei removed his jacket and laid it on a flat spot on the reef behind Feng Ling. "If you're really uncomfortable, why don't you lie down first?" "No, I'm fine. Don't try to be brave at this time. Any man will feel pain in his internal organs after being affected by the explosion, not to mention you are a girl." Feng Ling turned to look at him calmly. "Deputy Drillmaster Qiao, just pretend that you didn't find anything just now. I am a man, a member of 11 base, not a girl." Xiao Fei's breath stopped. Seeing her determined eyes, he sighed slightly. "All right, lie down first. Just like before, you are the deputy drillmaster, and I am a member of the sniper team. You are my superior. There is no need to treat me like this." Feng Ling's voice was hoarse and calm. "I am no different from others." He understood that Feng Ling hoped that nothing had happened. If the person who found out that she was a girl was someone else, she would probably kill him. However, the person who found out was her deputy instructor. Apart from giving him a few reminders, she couldn't do anything else. At the very least, she would be worried that her secret would be leaked out. Xiao Fei did not make things difficult for her. He raised his hand and heavily smacked her head. He used the same strength he usually used on the other members of the team. All right, don't be so long-winded. I'm not that talkative. I won't send away the most promising member of the sniper team just to share a secret. Don't you think so? Feng Ling's heart was pounding. Xiao Fei did not make things difficult for her. He raised his hand and heavily smacked her head. He used the same strength he usually used on the other members of the team. Feng Ling didn't feel much pain after being patted, but her short hair, which was still wet and sticky from the seawater when she just came to the island, was now pressed against the scalp on the back of her head. She shook her hair, and a few strands of short hair on her forehead swayed a few times. Xiao Fei watched this scene. In his mind, he was already imagining how Feng Ling would look like if she had long hair like other girls and wore ordinary clothes. Compared to Feng Ling's fair and clean face, she could still look so beautiful in men's clothes. Once she turned back into a woman, he thought of how Feng Ling usually trained with Kay and the other big men in the base and rolled around together in the mud. Those stinky brats really got off too easy. All of a sudden, a huge explosion sounded from the abandoned warehouse where the terrorists were gathered. Feng Ling and Xiao Fei both turned to look in that direction. After the explosion, black smoke rose from the abandoned warehouse. The flames were even more terrifying than the ones on the cruise ship. The thick black smoke was slowly swallowed up by the sea. Amidst the black smoke, 3 helicopters slowly flew in this direction. Below them, 2 inflatable rafts were pulled by the sea. Even though they couldn't see clearly from afar, they could tell that 11 Base had sent people to search for them after finding out that they had gone missing. The location where Feng Ling and Xiao Fei were sitting on the reef was very obvious. The helicopters passed through the thick black smoke and instantly discovered the small island in front of them. They directly flew over. When the helicopters approached and were about to land, the large propellers stirred up the surrounding wind and steadily landed on the island. Everyone on the 3 helicopters disembarked. Feng Ling turned back to look at the helicopters behind her. When she saw that Li Nanheng was walking in this direction unscathed, her heart was filled with an indescribable feeling. Strangely, it was as though she had escaped from death herself. However, she didn't know what it was. Chapter 8:10. Feng Ling was about to stand up on the reef, but as soon as she got up, she staggered because of the sharp pain in her back and chest. Xiao Fei, who was standing to the side and preparing to jump down from the reef, quickly reached out to support her. He then lowered his head to look at her, using his eyes to ask if she could hold on. Feng Ling shook her head calmly and said in a low voice, "I'm fine." "You're hurt?" Nanheng came over, glanced at Xiao Fei's action of holding Feng Ling's arm, turned his eyes away, and looked at Feng Ling's pale face. "The rescue team said you were injured on the cruise ship and disappeared after falling into the sea. Xiao Fei jumped into the sea to save you. How are you? Is it very serious? Why did you drift to such an island? Were you far from the coastline just now?" Before Feng Ling could speak, Xiao Fei directly said, "Boss, I'm fine." In order to save the mayor's wife, Feng Ling accompanied her on the cruise for too long. At that time, she even gave her life jacket and gas mask to the child, causing her to inhale a large amount of smoke. Later, she was affected by the explosion. I think her injuries are indeed serious. When we return, we must immediately send her to the hospital for a checkup. It's not as serious as Deputy Drillmaster Chow said. "Boss, I'm not." Before Feng Ling finished speaking, Nanheng heard her hoarse and abnormal voice, and his face darkened. Without listening to her nonsense, he turned back and ordered someone to help her and Xiao Fei down from the reef. When Xiao Fei let go of Feng Ling's hand, he glanced at her. Seeing that she had put on her clothes again, he didn't see anything wrong with her, so he boarded the helicopter with ease. Feng Ling, on the other hand, was different. She was seriously injured. Earlier, Xiao Fei had been supporting her. Right now, Feng Ling was struggling to even take a few steps. It was clear that she had been injured by the explosion. It was just that the flames from the explosion did not directly reach her body. Thankfully, it was the sea below. Otherwise, Fong Ling would have been charred black. Even her hair would have been burnt off. After Xiao Su helped Fong Ling onto the helicopter, Nanheng calmly ordered, Team 3, take all the lightly injured members back to the base infirmary. Han Jin, Ah Bao, stay here to check all the rescue helicopters. Team 4 and Team 5, return to the base training ground and continue to stand by. With that, he hurried back to the helicopter. When he entered the cabin, he saw Fong Ling, who had just been helped into the cabin. Fong Ling turned to look at the man who came back from outside. At this time, the overall situation was the most important. The man's calm expression and tone when he spoke into the headset made Fong Ling feel extremely at ease. It seemed that no matter what happened, this man would not easily frown. No matter what, he could calmly and rationally arrange everything. He was responsible for everyone in the base and would never care about this. The helicopter took off again. Xiao Fei was in another plane. In this plane, there were only Xiao Su, Nanheng, and Fong Ling in the cockpit. The sound of the propeller was too loud. Fong Ling found another headset at the back and put it on. Li Nanheng's concise follow-up orders echoed in her ears. When she flew over the sea near the coastline, she saw thick smoke billowing below. The fire on the cruise ship had long been swallowed by the waves, leaving only some black smoke. However, above the abandoned warehouse that had just been blown up, the fire was still soaring into the sky. Li Nanheng was calm and collected, methodically giving orders. 10 helicopters, dozens of team members, all listened to his arrangements. After arranging all the follow-up matters, Nanheng took off the headset on his head and tossed it aside. He went to the cockpit and gave a few words to Xiao Su. When he looked back, Fong Ling, who was sitting in the back of the fuselage, seemed to have not recovered from the end of the mission. He walked over to her. When he came to her side, he lowered his eyes to look at her still pale face. Fly directly to the Los Angeles hospital. There is a spare helipad there. The helicopter can be parked there. Fong Ling hesitated for a moment and said, Boss, there's no need to go through so much trouble. I'll just go to the hospital for a simple checkup. The helicopter is a public means of transportation for the base. I can't fly to the hospital because of my personal situation. You were injured by the explosion during a mission. Sending you to the hospital is not a personal matter. But, don't talk nonsense. Where does it hurt? I don't know if it's an internal injury as others have said, but it should be, because my internal organs seem to have been shaken. It hurts so much right now. Fong Ling looked at his serious and calm eyes and instinctively answered truthfully. The oil tank on the cruise exploded. You're lucky you didn't die on the spot. Go to the hospital for a checkup first. If it's serious, you can be hospitalized for surgery. You can return to the base after you've completely recovered. Fong Ling didn't speak anymore. She wasn't sure if her injuries were serious or not. There was no blood on the surface, but her body was indeed in pain. She could only wait for the hospital to find out the truth before deciding anything else. Although Fong Ling didn't speak, her expression was somewhat solemn. Nanheng glanced at the other helicopters, walked up to her with his long legs, and sat by her side. He asked mildly, How do you feel about your first mission like this? My heart is very excited. Fong Ling's answer was very official. Her voice was hoarse, but her tone was calm. Nanheng sneered, With your abilities, I can easily hand the mission of fighting the terrorists to you. Don't think that I'm denying your abilities by sending you to the cruise. Both sides need people with their own strengths. You and Xiao Fei are good swimmers. If it was anyone else on the cruise, they might not be able to do better than you. Besides, this kind of mission that others think is easy is actually the most difficult. Now that the mission has been successfully completed, I believe you understand what I'm saying. It was indeed very difficult. When facing the terrorists, she only needed to think of a way to protect her own life and then think of a way to kill the other party. But on the cruise, she had to risk her own life every time to protect others, especially that 3-year-old child who was already scared stiff. Fong Ling coughed, but she turned her back to Nanhang and coughed a few more times. After she felt more comfortable, she turned to look at the man by her side. At that time, Mayor Ted's wife refused to jump down no matter what. There was a delay of about 3 to 4 minutes. Otherwise, we could have safely avoided the explosion. Chapter 8:11. The man's voice was filled with patience and gentleness that Fong Ling had never heard before. Fong Ling thought that she had heard wrongly, but he suddenly stuffed 2 folded jackets into her back, allowing her to lean more comfortably. The man's movements were also natural, as though this was a normal thing. Fong Ling was startled and looked at him. Li Nanheng glanced at her calmly. "What are you looking at? The base has always treated the wounded on missions so humanely. You're already injured. I can't mistreat you anymore." "Fong Ling, boss, would it kill you to say something nice? Or would you die if I told you to do more heartwarming things?" The helicopter arrived at the largest hospital in the center of Los Angeles. Xiao Fei was directly sent back to the base on another plane. During this period, there was no way to contact him, but Fong Ling felt that Xiao Fei's character was not bad and he was reliable. He probably wouldn't tell anyone about her, so she didn't worry too much and directly entered the hospital according to Boss Li's arrangement. However, Fong Ling had never been seriously injured before, so the examination this time was very comprehensive, which meant that her gender couldn't be hidden in the medical field. While Nanhang was outside on the phone with the people in the base hall, she sat in the consulting room and told the doctor about her situation, including that she was actually a woman, but in order to find a suitable place for her to survive, she had to disguise herself as a man. Except for lying to others about her gender, she did not do anything outrageous. She told the doctor that she had been an orphan since she was a child and that she had finally found a home to return to. She also said that if her gender was exposed, she might get into a lot of trouble, including the military and the police in the hospital. She told the doctor a lot of half-truths, half-lies, half-truths, 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 half-truths. The doctor was an old man about 50 years old. He was an American, but Fong Ling grew up in the United States, so she was fluent in both Chinese and English and expressed herself very clearly. The doctor pushed the glasses on the bridge of his nose, asked her a few more questions, and then agreed that if her superior didn't specifically ask about her gender, he wouldn't casually expose this kind of thing, nor would he mention it, but if her superior specifically asked about her gender, he wouldn't lie and could only answer truthfully. To receive such a reply was already a very good result for Fong Ling. After all, she was not related to the doctor, and it was her first time meeting him. The doctor did not even know her background. The only thing she could do was not to stir up trouble, but at the same time, she could not deliberately lie. That would depend on her own luck. Fong Ling's lungs were indeed affected by the smoke, but it wasn't as serious as she had imagined. She didn't need to undergo surgery, but she still had to be hospitalized. She would have to rest in the hospital for at least a week. Hearing that there would be no surgery, Fong Ling's mood instantly relaxed. She was not afraid of surgery, but she was afraid that after the surgery, she would be unconscious because of the anesthesia. If Boss Li helped her change her clothes in the ward or lifted the quilt to wipe her body, he would definitely find out that she was a woman, and then she would really die. Fong Ling's eyes lit up. That day, Fong Ling was left in the hospital. After Nanheng confirmed with the doctor that there was no major problem with her, he first went to the ward to take a look. At that time, Fong Ling was sitting on the hospital bed doing an aerosol inhalation. She held an aerosol machine in her hand and stuck it to her nose and mouth, constantly inhaling the drug gas. Because she had choked on water earlier, Fong Ling still felt pain in her throat and nasal cavity. The doctor had previously said that this was a normal phenomenon and that it would no longer hurt in 2 days. The military has gone to the base. I'll go back to the base first. I'll come back after the mission is completely finished. Xiao Su will stay to accompany you. If you have any questions, just tell Xiao Su, Nanheng said to her. Fong Ling removed the atomizer from her nose. All right, boss, you don't have to come to see me. I'll cooperate with the treatment and return to the base as soon as possible. I won't delay the sniper team's training. You're already so injured, what's the point of training? Take care of yourself first. With that, Nan Heng's cell phone rang again. He had just finished a major mission, but he did not directly return to the base. Instead, he brought people to the hospital. Over there, both the military and the members of the base were about to explode. Nan Heng's expression was cold and heavy. He picked up his cell phone and turned to walk out. Feng Ling watched as he closed the door and did not speak. She continued to pick up the atomizer and put it between her mouth and nose. The sky gradually darkened. Xiao Su pushed the door open and came in. He saw that Feng Ling had already finished the atomizer and was leaning against the hospital bed, looking at her cell phone. Good, your injury is really ingenious. The injury is very serious, but there is no need for surgery. You just lie in the ward and don't need to do anything. You just need to rest for a week, Xiao Su said with a smile as he placed the dinner he had just bought for Feng Ling on the table by her bed. Feng Ling put down her cell phone and glanced at him. If you were injured like this, would you try it? When you really lie here in discomfort, you won't be able to say such words. I know how uncomfortable it is. When I first entered the base, I also participated in a rescue mission like this. At that time, in a 30-story building, there was a fire, and there was poisonous gas in the room. I inhaled a lot of it at that time. Later, my lungs hurt for a long time. It was uncomfortable to lie down, sit down, and stand. I couldn't stop wishing I could die. Xiao Su said with a smile, so I can understand how you feel. But anyway, boss personally asked you to rest here, so you didn't get injured for nothing. After being in the base for so long, it's rare for you to have a chance to rest like this. That's true. Usually, apart from missions, it's training. I really don't have a chance to lie down for a whole day like this. Feng Ling smiled. In fact, boss also has a plan in his heart. If the situation on the cruise is particularly dangerous, he probably won't let you go. Why? Isn't it because I'm good at swimming that he allowed me to go? Xiao Su shook his head. In the most dangerous situations, boss will personally go. Just like the terrorists we faced today. Every one of them had guns and bombs in their hands. In the warehouse, there are also various firearms bought from the underground mafia. That includes the ambushes all around us. That is the real danger. Xiao Su shook his head. Feng Ling looked at him. Chapter 8:12. Do you often go on missions with boss? Feng Ling asked. Xiao Su thought for a moment. More or less. I've been by boss's side for many years. Back then, I was in my teens just like you. I've been in the base for so many years. It won't be long before I leave the base to work at the American police station. To be honest, I'm quite reluctant to leave. After all, this place is no different from home to me. In a situation like today, facing the terrorists, in addition to the explosion of the warehouse below, in such a dangerous situation, if boss told you to jump out of the plane to rescue them, would you jump? I would. He did not hesitate. Even if I would be buried in a sea of fire, blown to death, or even crippled for life, would I still jump? I still have to jump. Feng Ling's expression softened. That's why saving Mayor Ted's wife and child on the cruise was a mission I had to do. Regardless of whether it was because of the mission or because of human nature, I did what I had to do. I didn't hesitate when I shouldn't have. Right now, it's already good enough that I'm still alive. You don't have to specially take care of me. I'm fine. He did not expect that after asking so many questions, Feng Ling would only ask them not to take her injuries to heart. This brat, despite his young age, had a steady personality. Who would have thought that he would be so well behaved? It was impossible to dislike him at all. In fact, he even liked this brat from the bottom of his heart. Of course, with Boss Li around, Xiao Su's fondness for Feng Ling was limited to that of a big brother to a little brother. He did not dare to have any other thoughts. Furthermore, Xiao Su swore that he was absolutely straight. After so many years in the base, he had never had any feelings for any man. However, towards Feng Ling, it was as though he was watching a child grow up bit by bit. Hearing Feng Ling's words, Xiao Su was very gratified. The sky outside the window had already darkened. Feng Ling picked up the food Xiao Su bought and ate some. Boss Li did not return. Throughout the entire time, Xiao Su accompanied her and took care of her. There were many matters in the base waiting for Boss to return and resolve. He had specially left Xiao Su here. Feng Ling understood the importance Boss placed on her. Boss was also very concerned about the injuries of the members of the base. This was enough to prove that he was indeed not an overly cold person. Everything that had happened on this mission was also a form of growth for Feng Ling. In times of crisis, Instructor Qiao's orderly manner showed that they were soldiers who had been through hundreds of battles. She was only a half-baked newbie. She was considered outstanding among the newbies, but among the elites and seniors of the base, she was still a newbie who needed to be trained and grew. In the evening, Xiao Su went to the lounge next door. After Feng Ling took the medicine, she did another aerosol treatment under the doctor's instructions. This time, after the treatment, she felt that her chest and lungs were no longer burning with pain. She just didn't know if she could have a good sleep. Before going to bed, she sent a message to Xiao Su and asked for some electronic information from the base. Then lying on the hospital bed to read. He had read a lot of professional terms and detailed summaries about base extermination missions and rescue missions. Then, he looked at the helicopter's heat resistance and the pilot's information. There were also some special code words that only the people in the base knew. As she read, she used the pen that she had borrowed from the doctor to write on a piece of paper. The tip of the pen moved swiftly and she tried hard to recall the words that Boss Li had said to the base. Then, she continued to send messages to Xiao Su, asking him about Boss Li's orders and other aspects that she needed to know in times of crisis. At 9 in the evening, Feng Ling was still reading the information on her phone when the door to the ward was suddenly pushed open. She paused and raised her head from the phone screen to see Li Nanheng, who had actually returned to the hospital. The man by the door paused for a moment before sending over a simple sentence, "You're injured to this extent, yet you're not sleeping?" The man's voice was low and clean, as though it was a steady and beautiful musical instrument. From his tone and expression, it was likely that the matters at the base and with the American military had already been settled. There was no need for him to worry about any battle plans with the terrorists. She wasn't sure if it was because she was injured, but the man's tone toward her today had become much gentler. It was just a simple sentence, but it strangely stirred her heart. Feng Ling abruptly placed the pen and paper in her hands on the table by the bed. At the same time, she placed her phone by the side. At this moment, Li Nanheng also opened the door. Originally, there was only one emergency lamp by the bedside. Right now, due to the light from the corridor outside, it was much brighter. The man stood against the light, his figure tall and slender. Feng Ling glanced in his direction. It was already so late, yet Boss Li had suddenly returned. She didn't know why she suddenly felt nervous. She directly asked him, "Boss, why did you return to the hospital? Is there something you need from me?" Li Nanheng looked at the slightly pale fellow lying on the bed and casually turned on the light in the ward. The moment the light turned on, he walked over and stood by the bedside. He looked down at the person sitting on the bed and then at the loose, light blue hospital gown that Feng Ling was wearing. They were used to wearing black uniforms in the base. Everyone wore black from head to toe. It was rare to see Feng Ling wearing light-colored clothes. Her pale skin was so white that it was almost translucent. It was tempting to reach up and touch her. He looked at her calmly and said in an indiscernible tone, "The base is fine. You're injured. I can't just leave you here." Feng Ling paused. "But it's already very late. If you rush back to the base, you'll have to drive for a long time. Won't it be troublesome?" Nanheng took off the jacket of his uniform and casually threw it on the simple sofa by the window of the ward. Wearing only a black t-shirt, he said lightly, "I'll stay here tonight. I'll go back tomorrow morning." Feng Ling. Stay here? Boss, you want to stay in the hospital? Stay in my ward? What? No. Li Nanheng walked to the simple bathroom in the other direction of the ward without looking back and replied stiffly, "If any member of the base is injured, I will come to take a look. As you said, it's too late now. It'll be troublesome to drive back. Why don't you just stay here? This ward doesn't lack anything. The sofa is big enough for one person to sleep on. Is there a problem with me staying here?" When he passed by the end of the bed, he glanced at the pen and paper she had just placed on the table by the bed. "Xiao Su said that you're cramming all the dangerous mission knowledge in the base based on today's mission. You only learn to cram when you're injured. You're really promising. Chapter 8:13. However, when his gaze fell on the contents of the paper, Nanheng's footsteps faltered. He abruptly walked around the bed and picked up the paper. Feng Ling had actually written down everything he had said. Seeing that he was looking at what she had written, Feng Ling's heart tightened. She rushed to explain, "I want to quickly get used to the high-frequency and dangerous missions in the future. Since boss brought me along this time, I will definitely have the opportunity to go on such missions with you guys next time. Also, I need to understand the professional jargon boss mentioned on the helicopter. Otherwise, I'm afraid that I'll drag everyone down if I don't understand it. I have to get used to the language environment under such intense missions." Nanheng was silent for a moment. He put down the paper and continued to walk toward the bathroom. It wasn't until she heard the sound of the man showering that Feng Ling realized that boss was still wearing the clothes he had worn during the day. After returning to the base and finishing up everything, he actually rushed back to the hospital without even changing his clothes or showering. Usually, Boss Lee seemed to have a serious obsession with cleanliness. Usually, when he returned to the base, he would wash up immediately. However, this time, he had rushed back to the hospital. In the past few years, although Feng Ling often hung out with the group of men in the base, she had never shared a room with anyone. Even when she showered, she always had her own room. Right now, hearing the sound of water coming from the bathroom, Feng Ling's expression faltered at the thought of boss showering inside. She picked up the pen, paper, and cell phone on the table again. She continued to recall what boss had said during the day to distract herself from listening carefully to the movements in the bathroom. 20 minutes later, the bathroom door opened. Feng Ling heard the sound but didn't think much. She subconsciously raised her eyes to look in the direction of the sound. However, she saw that Nanheng was not wearing any clothes on his upper body. There were even water droplets dripping down his short hair. He only had a white disinfectant towel wrapped around his lower body as he walked out. Feng Ling didn't expect that a man would come out after showering without any clothes on. Her gaze fell on his bare upper body. She had seen Kay and the others bare-chested during training, but when she saw the towel wrapped around his lower body, her mind exploded. She abruptly sat up from the bed and rushed over. She ran past him and opened the bathroom door behind him to look in, only to see that the clothes he had changed out of were thrown into the sink by the side. If she didn't wash them, she wouldn't be able to wear them again. She could only close the bathroom door. When she turned back, her eyes met Nanheng's gaze. For a moment, the ward fell into a strange silence. "What are you looking for?" The man saw her suddenly jumped out of bed and ran over in a hurry, and his eyes were inexplicable. "Feng Ling. Boss, didn't you bring spare clothes?" Nanheng glanced at her coldly and casually tied the towel around his waist more tightly. With his back facing her, he walked to the sofa and picked up his phone to call Xiao Su. "Go buy me a set of clothes in the right size nearby." After hanging up the phone, the man glanced at the guy who was standing stiffly by the bathroom door. "Why are you in a daze? We're both men. Did taking a shower touch your abnormal nerve?" "Feng Ling, He casually picked up the jacket that had been thrown on the sofa and took out a cigarette. He was about to light one, but the moment the lighter lit up, he paused and extinguished it. He turned back to look at the person who had returned to the bedside and remembered that Fong Ling's lungs were having some problems from the smoke. If he smoked in the ward, it would be a second injury to Fong Ling's lungs. The man bent down again and threw the cigarette and lighter back onto his jacket. He said lightly, "You don't have to look at me so nervously. I won't smoke anymore. You should rest when you need to. You don't have to look at me." Fong Ling thought to herself, "Boss, how can I rest when you're here? As long as you're around, I'm used to being as tense as a spring. I instinctively feel that I should do 50 frog jumps on the spot, okay?" However, she didn't say this out loud. She just returned to the bed and covered the bed with the quilt again. Then she looked at the man who was standing by the sofa and looking out of the window indifferently. With the moonlight shining in from the window and the faint light in the room, Fong Ling finally had a chance to carefully look at the man's side profile in such a quiet moment. Li Nanheng was really good-looking, and he didn't lose the slightest bit of his masculinity. He was full of hormones, but he wasn't the type that made people feel scared at the sight of him. Instead, he was handsome. When he smiled, the whole world seemed to light up, making all the members relax. When he was serious, it made people tense up all over, and when he was cold, it made people feel as though the god of death had arrived. But it was such a man who she had accidentally provoked in the sauna room of the orphanage. Fong Ling really didn't expect that in the future, she would have so much contact with him in the future. She lived and grew up in 11 base, which was equivalent to growing up under this man's strong wings. As if sensing the boy's strange gaze, Li Nanheng paused by the window and looked back at her. "What are you looking at?" "Fong Ling, boss, there's a lounge next to it. Xiao Su said that there are 2 beds in the lounge. Won't it be too hard for you to sleep on the sofa in the ward? Why don't you sleep on the bed next door with Xiao Su?" Li Nanheng narrowed his eyes. "Is there anything else in the lounge besides the bed?" "Fong Ling, there should be a bathroom. You want me to sleep next to the bathroom?" Fong Ling paused and then said, "How about, boss, if you really want to stay here, I definitely can't make it hard for you. You sleep on my bed, and I'll sleep on the sofa." Li Nanheng's voice was cold. "I'm fine. You want me to sleep on the hospital bed? Are you cursing me? I just can't watch you sleep on the sofa, boss. Why don't I ask the hospital to arrange a more luxurious lounge for you? Or, there should be a hotel nearby. Boss, you can stay there for a night. There's no need to go through so much trouble. It's good here." The man turned and sat directly on the sofa. His sitting posture caused the man's slender and strong legs to be casually open. Such a small towel could barely cover the scenery of the man's legs. Chapter 8:14. Perhaps it was because the ward was too quiet. Or perhaps Fong Ling was used to living alone in a room. In this medium-sized ward, she seemed to be able to hear the man's steady breathing when she closed her eyes, which sounded particularly pleasant in the quiet night. She had never thought that a person's breathing could attract her attention. Fong Ling closed her eyes for a while and really didn't dare to look at the sofa, but she could roughly hear what was going on. For example, she vaguely heard the man change his position on the sofa. He should be leaning against the side where there was a pillow. Thinking of Boss Li's usual behavior, she guessed that at this moment, the man should be casually stretching his limbs and leaning against the sofa to relax. Then she heard the sound of a cell phone, but it only rang a few times before it turned to silent. Boss Li must have muted the phone because he was afraid of disturbing her. After lying stiffly for a while, Fong Ling turned over on the bed. "Still not sleeping?" The man's voice rang casually, which was particularly clear and quiet in the quiet night. Fong Ling turned her back to the man on the sofa, opened her eyes, and said softly, "Yes, I'm going to sleep soon. Do you feel uncomfortable?" "No, I had 2 inhalations today and feel much better. I should be able to leave the hospital in less than a week." I don't think it's too serious. The doctor asked you to stay in the hospital for observation for a week, so stay for a week. It doesn't matter if you are here or not. Rest assured and don't rush back. After the man's voice fell, the ward returned to silence. Fong Ling didn't speak anymore but just closed her eyes. About half an hour later, there was a light knock on the door, and then Xiao Su came in. Seeing that Fong Ling was lying on the bed, he walked over lightly and put a set of clothes he had just bought on the sofa. Boss, try this set of clothes to see if it fits you. I bought it according to your usual size. It should be about the same. Well, okay, go to rest. Li Nanheng took out the clothes from the bag and gestured for Xiao Su to go back to the rest room to rest early. Xiao Su nodded. After all, it was too late. It was not good to talk in this ward, so he turned around and walked out. The ward returned to silence. Nanheng spread out the newly bought clothes and was about to change into them by the sofa. He paused and looked at Fong Ling, who was lying on the bed with her back to him. Normally speaking, they were all men, and there was nothing to avoid. However, he didn't know if it was because Fong Ling was avoiding him or because he had an inexplicable feeling for Fong Ling, but he felt that it was indeed inappropriate to change his clothes here. The man directly took the clothes into the simple bathroom. After changing, he conveniently took the dirty clothes in the sink and the black combat jacket placed on the sofa outside into the bathroom to wash them. Hearing the sound of washing clothes in the bathroom, Fong Ling opened her eyes again. In the blink of an eye, she saw a man wearing a black shirt and black casual pants. Although the management system of 11 Base was not as strict as that of the domestic army, it was almost the same. Everyone's clothes were also washed by themselves. However, Boss Li's subordinates would often fight to wash his clothes, but Boss had never allowed them to wash his clothes. Sometimes, everyone would even speculate if the Li family had arranged for a housekeeper or an auntie in the base. It was just that they hadn't noticed. Otherwise, why would Boss Li's clothes be so clean? From the looks of it now, his clothes were indeed washed by himself. Even if this was the young master of the Li family, he had been sent to 11 Base from a young age. He was likely long used to doing things by himself and did not have the illness of a rich young master. Although there were simple washrooms and bathrooms in the hospital ward, it wasn't a suitable place to wash clothes. Nanheng picked up a piece of antiseptic soap from the side and casually washed away the dirt and bloodstains on his clothes. At the very least, his clothes didn't look as dirty as before he washed them with clean water and hung them in the bathroom. He planned to wash them again in the washing machine when he returned to the base. The man walked out of the bathroom and turned to see Fong Ling, who had unknowingly opened her eyes again. His cold brows furrowed. The moment their eyes met, Fong Ling thought for a moment and sat up from the bed. "Boss, I can't sleep. Why don't you tell me about the things to take note of when confronting terrorists? If there's such a mission in the future, I can also be on the front lines," Fong Ling said as she sat up. "There aren't many things to take note of. A mission is just a mission. While completing the mission, the most important thing is to remember to protect your own life. 11 Base doesn't have such brainwashing ideas of sacrificing one's life for the country. We are only a semi-military base serving all the countries included in the United Nations. We are responsible for all aspects of security. The United States and China are the most important because these two countries have the most people in the base, especially the Chinese." The man's tone was calm. "While completing the mission, you must bring your own life back. This is the most basic principle. Everything else depends on adapting to the situation. If your body can't take it, just a little blood loss will cause you to die. If you can take it, even if you bleed for a day, you can still be saved. This is the importance of physical fitness." Fong Ling understood what he meant. "Right now, I'm working very hard to increase the endurance of my body. Give me a little more time, and I will definitely not be inferior to the others in the sniper team." "You aren't inferior to anyone else, but you are indeed too skinny." The man looked at the large, light blue hospital gown she was wearing. The gown was overly loose on her, as though a child had stolen an adult's clothes. Fong Ling really had no way of dealing with this. She had already worked very hard to increase her muscles, but a woman's body was originally different from a man's. Perhaps a man's long-term training would allow him to develop all sorts of sturdy muscles. But as a woman, she belonged to the category of women who were slightly taller than other women, but her bones were very thin. No matter how much she ate or how much she trained, the most she could do was appear slightly healthier than other women. At most, when she exerted herself in certain movements, her arms and calves would show a slight hint of sporty female muscles that were usually not visible. Chapter 8:15. Nanheng took a look at the time and saw that it was already past 10 o'clock at night. He was about to walk back to the sofa when he paused and looked back at Fong Ling, who looked like she couldn't control her weight and muscles. "You can't sleep. Shall I accompany you out to gain weight?" Fong Ling was startled. "How do I gain weight? Before I came here, I saw that there is a food street near the hospital. There are all kinds of American and Chinese snacks. Do you want to try it?" The moment Fong Ling heard this, she stood up, grabbed her coat, and put it on. Anyway, it was summer and the night was not cold. She then put on the pair of flip-flops that Xiao Su had bought for her, grabbed her phone, and followed the man out. 11 Base was outside the suburbs of Los Angeles. Although the environment of the base was very good, it was far from the city. Usually, people didn't have the chance to stroll on such a small street. Although Fong Ling was not very interested in these things, since she couldn't sleep, it was better to go out for a walk than to lie in the hospital like this. The doctor had also said that she only needed to receive treatment and aerosol inhalation at a fixed time every day. No surgery, no injections, and only needed to stay in the ward when the doctor came to check up on her. The rest of the time, she was free to move around. Besides, she wasn't that delicate. She could go on a mission at any time with such a small problem, let alone going out for a stroll or a midnight snack. Li Nanheng had walked to the door and was standing outside looking at her. Fong Ling walked over quickly, looking not sleepy at all. "Boss, can I just put on my coat and go out? I won't change the hospital gown inside. It's too troublesome to change it." He looked at the loose clothes she was wearing and squeezed out a flat voice from his throat, "N." The two of them walked out. In order to avoid the sight of the nurse on duty, Fong Ling deliberately turned to a public bathroom. When the nurse turned to go to the office to get something, she quickly walked in the direction of the elevator. After entering the elevator, Li Nanheng glanced at Fong Ling standing by the side. "What do you want to eat?" Hearing this, Fong Ling suddenly smiled, stood closer to him, and said in a relaxed and cheerful mood, "Didn't you say that there are local American snacks and Chinese snacks? I haven't eaten any snacks before. Let's go take a look first." Who knew that she had lived for more than 10 years but had never eaten those snacks? It was rare for her to experience it once, so she was probably a little excited. However, Fong Ling was not good at showing such excitement, so her eyes seemed to be blooming with some kind of brilliance and were bright. Nanheng looked at her for a while and didn't say anything, but the corners of his mouth curved into a smile that even he didn't notice. When the elevator reached the first floor, the man walked forward and Fong Ling rushed to follow him. Perhaps she was too excited and overjoyed. When she stepped out of the elevator, she didn't pay much attention to her feet and accidentally stepped in the middle of the marble floor outside the elevator. The tip of her foot was stuck there and her left foot suddenly flew out. She stumbled and with a dong sound, she bumped into Li Nanheng in front of her. Her nose hit the man's firm and broad back harshly. Nanheng didn't expect the situation behind him and was almost knocked down a marble staircase in front of the elevator. Fortunately, he held on to the railing of the staircase and steadied himself. Fong Ling raised her head with lingering fear, only to see Li Nanheng's expressionless face. The man narrowed his eyes. "You're so reckless. I'm not in front of you. Do you want to fall down?" Fong Ling could still feel the warmth of the man's back, and her heart was thumping non-stop. Hearing this, she coughed and bent down to pick up the slippers that had just flown out. I didn't do it on purpose. As she put on her shoes, she glanced at the marble staircase in front of her. This largest hospital in Los Angeles was very luxurious. A part of the first floor had been dug down to build a particularly large main entrance hall of the hospital. From here, it took about 4 or 5 steps to reach the bottom. Thinking of the scene that if Li Nanheng lost his balance and rolled down the stairs, Feng Ling couldn't help laughing. She didn't know that Boss Li was looking down at her at this moment and didn't notice that the hospital gown she was wearing was so loose that the man could see her collarbone clearly. The boy's collar was loose. As she squatted like this, the man could see the view of her collarbone. Li Nanheng's eyes abruptly darkened. His Adam's apple moved and his heart skipped a beat. Damn it. This boy's collarbone was so beautiful. He should be a woman. Was he born with the wrong gender? Why did he have to be a man? The snack street Li Nanheng mentioned was indeed behind the parking lot downstairs of the hospital. It was a very long street. On both sides were various small shops selling all kinds of things. At night, various stalls would come out and occupy both sides of the street. Over the years, it had gradually become a standard snack street, which was equivalent to a particularly prosperous night market in China. From the main entrance of the hospital, they walked to the parking lot on the ground and passed through the alley behind. In total, it took about 10 minutes to arrive. In these 10 minutes, Li Nanheng walked in front. The man's side profile was cold and calm, elegant and aloof. When they arrived at the snack street, the man's every breath and every step, in a unique way, signaled to strangers to stay away. Feng Ling followed by the man's side as they walked down the bustling street. It was as though all of her life experiences since she was young and the life that was so peaceful that other than eating and living, there was finally a hint of dust in her life at this moment. It was as though this was the life that a person should come into contact with and enjoy in this world. Busyness and enjoyment, eating and drinking happily in this chaotic world were not as simple as eating and wearing warm clothes. Everyone here seemed to be very interesting. When Feng Ling was young, she was raised by a pack of wolves. When she grew up, she didn't have any thoughts. Now, standing in such a crowded place, seeing all kinds of lights and people, she suddenly thought of her parents for the first time in her life. Who exactly were her parents? What kind of people were they? Why was she separated from her parents? Was she an abandoned child? Or did something happen? In such an interesting world, why did she not even know where her roots were? In order to dispel the sudden doubts in her heart, she took the initiative to say, "It's so lively here. Boss, what do you want to eat?" Anything. How was she supposed to respond? Kay said that the Chinese barbecue is very delicious. Is that a barbecue stall? Let's go eat barbecue. Anything. Oh, dash. Chapter 8:16. At this moment, Li Nanheng fully displayed his instinct to be concise and comprehensive. If he could say 2 words, he definitely wouldn't say a third word. He was clearly the one who suggested eating out, but he said it was fine. How could Feng Ling, who had never eaten these things, respond? She didn't even know how to choose. Feng Ling tilted her head and touched his calm face. The two of them walked side by side for a while. The man didn't say a word. He only occasionally looked at the various stalls by the roadside and didn't say much. He invited someone out to shop on the food street and then left her to fend for herself? Was this the so-called straight man who didn't know how to be romantic and coax people? If she had known this, Feng Ling wouldn't have come down from the hospital in the middle of the night to shop on some food street. But Boss Li took the initiative to suggest it. How could she refuse? Feng Ling tried hard to find a topic. Boss, do you usually come to the hospital to visit every member of the base after they are injured? Yes. Then do you also stay in the same ward as the injured members? Li Nanheng glanced at her. Just say what you want to say. There's no need to beat around the bush. Feng Ling, he saw through her so easily. Nanheng glanced at her face and added indifferently, "After all, I'm the person in charge of the base and the captain of all the training teams. Except for missions and training, I don't have much contact with the members. If I don't show up to visit and show how much the base values every member when they're injured, it would be too much." His words made it seem that even visiting her in the hospital was just doing his duty and he didn't have the slightest intention of caring for her. He was clearly a person who was cold on the outside but warm on the inside, but he insisted on making himself sound so unapproachable and heartless. Fong Ling's soft, short hair fluttered in the night wind. She fidgeted with the stray hair by her ear and suddenly seemed to recall something. She turned to ask him, "Boss, is there a barber shop nearby?" Li Nanheng paused and looked at her. "Why are you looking for a barber shop?" "Cut my hair. I feel that my hair still looks a little longer. It's perfect to cut it to K's and Tam's short length." She pointed at her soft, short hair sticking to her forehead. "The barber in the base always says that my hair is very good and that it's a pity to shave it short. He stubbornly insists that I keep this hairstyle. It's rare for me to come out. If there's a barber outside, I'll shave it short. That way, I'll probably look a little healthier than before." "This guy wants to shave his head?" Li Nanheng glanced at her calmly. Although the young man's hair was short, he at least looked refined and gentle, making people feel that he was exceptionally soft. He tried to imagine what Fong Ling's hairstyle would look like if it was shorter. He had to admit that even if Fong Ling had a shorter hairstyle, she would still look good. However, he had gotten used to looking at her this way. If she suddenly changed her hairstyle, he wouldn't feel right. Li Nanheng couldn't tell what he was feeling, but he really didn't want her hair to be too short. Besides, this length was also very normal. If her loose and soft hair was rubbed on this guy's head, it would feel very comfortable. If it was short, if he rubbed it, it would probably hurt. When Fong Ling first arrived at the base at the age of 13, her hair was very short. Later, it was the barber in the base who trimmed her hairstyle, and she had maintained it for a long time. Li Nanheng couldn't tell what he was thinking at this moment. He quickly glanced at a small barber shop not far away and said indifferently, "There's no one nearby." Fong Ling paused. "Then boss, where do you usually go to get your hair cut? Is it all done by the barber in the base? There are so many men in the base. Why would it be so troublesome? Buy a hairdresser and do it yourself." He coldly opened his eyes and lied. Fong Ling looked at his short but handsome hairstyle suspiciously. "Boss, did you come up with this hairstyle yourself?" Li Nanheng was too lazy to answer. When they passed by the barber's shop in front, he deliberately took her across the long street from the other side of the crowd and didn't approach the barber's shop. He didn't answer, and Fong Ling didn't insist on asking. She thought that Kay's hairstyle was indeed similar to that of the other brothers in the base. It turned out that they all did it themselves. No wonder they were not creative and only had short or squarish hair. However, after looking at it for a long time, she felt that it was very neat, and the squarish hairstyle was really a test of appearance. It turned out that this group of people in the base were all good-looking. After passing by the barber's shop and making sure that Fong Ling wouldn't see him, Nanheng continued to walk forward silently. Fong Ling was not stupid. After walking for a while, she felt that something was wrong and looked back at the crowd behind her. "Why did we pass by the barbecue stall over there?" "Boss, don't you want to try it?" "Li Nanheng, Chinese barbecue tastes terrible. I'm not interested. If you want to eat it, eat something else. Forget about the barbecue." "Is the barbecue very bad?" "But I heard that it's very delicious, especially." "Very bad." Fong Ling, for some reason, she felt that boss's words seemed to be against his conscience. She didn't suspect anything else. She thought that maybe boss just didn't like barbecue. Although they came to the food street, Li Nanheng still didn't allow Fong Ling to eat at the roadside stalls, especially those that emitted smoke. He took her around. Fong Ling knew that it was because she still needed to aerosol to clear her lungs, and she couldn't smell these smoky things. A noodle shop was in front of them, and it was a large chain brand from China. Li Nanheng said, "There isn't much training and activity during the recovery period. It's not easy to digest lying in the hospital, so we can eat some easy-to-digest noodles." With that, the man took the lead and walked in. After a few steps, he remembered that Feng Ling seemed to like eating noodles in the base cafeteria, so he simply turned back and held her wrist to pull her in. The boy's wrist was incredibly slender. It was clearly a hand that had the strength to hold a spear, but it was so thin. Nanheng resisted the urge to grab her sleeve to see how thin she was under it. He didn't say much and directly brought Feng Ling to a quiet seat inside. Because there were a lot of people in the restaurant and it was always full, it was difficult to find a seat. However, they were lucky. As soon as they got up, a seat in the corner near the back window happened to be empty after someone finished eating. They went over and sat down. Chapter 8:17. It's all unclean and unnutritious junk food outside. Don't eat those now. Just sit here and eat a bowl of noodles. The man's face was still expressionless. Feng Ling, but boss, this is my first time shopping on the food street. It smells quite good. Seeing the boy's somewhat regretful expression, it seemed that since Feng Ling appeared in the base, this was the first time she saw this usually calm boy had such an expression of longing for something. When your body is better, I'll bring you here again if you want to eat. Bear with it for the next few days. Feng Ling's gaze fell on the wine list on the table, which was clearly marked in both Chinese and English. After asking for a bottle of mineral water, she raised her eyes to look at him. Can I come again in the future? If the base is not busy, I can bring you here again on the weekends during the afternoon break. With that, Nanheng ignored her and directly ordered 2 bowls of the best beef noodle in this chain restaurant from the waiter who came over. Seeing that the boss clearly said that he wanted to come out to eat, but in the end, his attitude seemed to be, "I don't want to be very warm to you," Feng Ling didn't say much while waiting for the noodles. When the waiter brought up the noodles, Feng Ling thanked him and at the same time turned to ask politely, "May I ask if there's a barber shop nearby?" Li Nanheng had just picked up a magazine from the magazine rack by the table when his hand paused. He turned his eyes and looked at the waitress standing by the side with a somewhat dangerous look. The waitress saw such a handsome and fair-skinned little boy was politely asking her, and for a moment, she didn't notice the look in the eyes of the tall and handsome man opposite her. She directly answered, "There's a barber shop behind the hottest barbecue stall 300 meters away." Behind the barbecue stall? The barbecue place that they just passed by? Feng Ling paused and abruptly turned to look at Li Nanheng. Seeing that she had nothing to do, the waitress smiled again and turned to leave. Li Nanheng was expressionless and did not explain. He directly spat out 3 words, "Don't cut it." Feng Ling, why? He still remained expressionless, "No reason. I'm your boss. This is an order." "Boss, you still care whether I cut my hair or not? There are too many crew cuts in the base. I'm tired of looking at them. Your hairstyle isn't bad." With that, Li Nanheng casually asked a waitress passing by, "Isn't his hairstyle good?" The waitress was confused by the question, but when she took a closer look at the handsome young man in front of him, she smiled sincerely and said, "Yes, very handsome and good-looking, like he walked out of a manga." Feng Ling could only smile at such an evaluation. When she raised her eyes again, she saw that Li Nanheng had raised his eyebrows. Although he did not smile, it was clear that there was a hint of pride hidden under his cold expression. If he didn't want to cut it, so be it. Feng Ling picked up the chopsticks and ate the noodles. During the meal, no one spoke. Boss Li's temper was hard to understand, and Feng Ling couldn't say much. Usually, Feng Ling was a person of few words. When boss didn't speak, she was especially quiet. After eating noodles, the two went to a supermarket in front of the snack street. Feng Ling had to stay in the hospital for a week. Although the hospital had everything, she didn't bring her daily necessities from the base. She didn't have any relatives who could help her buy daily necessities. Since she was out, she might as well buy some back. Anyway, after using them, she could directly take them back to the base, so it wouldn't be a waste. When they arrived at the supermarket, Fong Ling looked at a lot of things, including shampoo, shower gel, toothpaste, toothbrush, towels, and sunscreen that could be used in the base, as well as some other daily necessities. However, she did not pick things fast, and even very slowly. She habitually looked at the price, compared it with the price of similar products, and calculated which was the most cost-effective. Finally, she picked up the bottles and cans and put them into the shopping cart. Li Nanheng looked at her by the side. After a long time, he asked indifferently, "The bonus that the base usually gives you is not enough? Even if a part of it is with me, it will not be less than 10,000 yuan a month. Do you not have enough money?" Fong Ling chose a toothpaste and put it into the shopping cart. "It's enough." "Since it's enough, why are you so frugal?" Fong Ling paused and raised her head to look at him. "I'm used to it. Before entering the base, I didn't spend much money. After entering the base, there isn't much that I need to spend money on. It's rare that I come out to buy things. I want to feel the pleasure of buying and choosing things." Li Nanheng, in fact, when Fong Ling was a child, she was often hungry. Some people could describe her as poor, but she was not poor. When she was a child, she had no concept of money or life. She just wanted to eat and live, like an animal's instinct. Later, she gradually understood the importance of money, but she would not waste every penny. Otherwise, she would only feel unsettled. Watching her choose and compare, Li Nanheng felt annoyed. The reason for his annoyance was not because he was impatient to wait here. Instead, he could see how bad Fong Ling's life was. Otherwise, she wouldn't be so careful. When she thought about how this young man had once passed by the window of a certain restaurant and was almost chased out just because he wanted to go in for a bite of someone else's leftovers, it wasn't hard to imagine the worst days when she had to starve. There were many members in 11 Base with poor family conditions, but no matter how poor they were, at least they had someone to rely on. However, most of them were from wealthy families and only chose to enter 11 Base to train. But Fong Ling was clearly different. "Do you still want to eat barbecue?" the man suddenly asked in a low voice. Fong Ling, who was picking a toothbrush cup, paused and looked up at the man. It seemed that she could see the indescribable emotions in the man's eyes. It seemed that he had a particularly uncomfortable feeling of guilt for not being able to satisfy what she wanted to eat just now. However, this emotion was not obvious. Fong Ling only saw it briefly, and the man's expression turned coldly in another direction to look at the other shelves behind her. Fong Ling held the toothbrush cup and smiled. "Boss, I'm already full. Even if you want me to eat now, I can't eat anymore. Besides, it's already very late. I have to go back to the ward to lie down. Aren't you afraid that my digestive system will have problems? Then come out to eat tomorrow night." Chapter 8:18. Fong Ling smiled. Although her smile was not very obvious, for Fong Ling, who was usually cold and expressionless, this slight movement of her eyebrows was already a very understanding smile. "All right, then I'll wait for boss to treat me," Fong Ling said as she put the things she had just picked into the shopping cart. When she went to the cashier to pay the bill, Li Nanheng suddenly asked her to take 2 bottles of mineral water from the freezer next to him. Fong Ling turned to take 2 bottles and was about to pay the bill when she saw the man casually took out a black card and handed it to the cashier. When she saw it was a black card, the cashier was surprised. A black card was not something that ordinary people could have. They were either especially rich or especially powerful, but why would such a rich person go shopping in the supermarket himself? And looking at the pile of things in the shopping cart, the price was very high, cheap, and easy to use. It didn't seem like people with a black card would buy it at all. But the cashier didn't dare to say a word. When she looked up at the tall man in front of her, she subconsciously took the card and swiped it. Fong Ling took the water and was about to speak, but the cashier had already swiped the card and then respectfully and cautiously handed the black card back to the tall man. "Boss, although these things are not expensive, they add up to 200 or 300 yuan. I can buy them myself," Feng Ling approached and said. "Pay for the 2 bottles of water in your hand." The man just glanced at her, put the things in the shopping cart into 2 shopping bags, and turned to carry them away. Feng Ling looked at the water in her hand, which added up to less than 5 yuan. It was already late when she returned to the hospital. Feng Ling once again avoided the nurse on duty and returned to the ward. On the contrary, Li Nanheng, who came to visit the patient, swaggered in with 2 bags of things. The nurse on duty looked at the things in his hand in confusion. First, she didn't know when this family member went out, and second, why did he buy so many things? Was he going to stay in the hospital for a long time? Of course, the nurse didn't dare to ask. When Li Nanheng came out of the elevator with the things in his hand, she gave him an admiring look, suppressed the doubt in her eyes, and watched the man's back all the way back to the ward. After returning to the ward, Feng Ling took off her coat, drank some water, and sat back on the bed. After returning to the ward, Li Nanheng helped her place the things she bought one by one in the simple small bathroom in the ward. She didn't expect Boss Li to be so considerate. Feng Ling looked at the man's figure in the bathroom and curved her lips slightly. Her eyes revealed a smile that she did not even notice. 3 days later, Boss Li stayed in the hospital for 1 night. The next morning, before dawn, he was called back by a call from the base. Xiao Su still stayed in the hospital, but under normal circumstances, he was only responsible for preparing breakfast, lunch, and dinner for Feng Ling or buying some medicine for her to use during the atomization. For the rest of the time, Feng Ling was in a relatively quiet state. This was also the first time she had spent such a peaceful and idle life in the base in the past few years, in the endless training life. This feeling wasn't exactly good, but it wasn't bad either. It was true that she was leisurely and comfortable, but it was also true that she was bored. She asked Xiao Su to only stay in the hospital for 3 days before returning to the base. Xiao Su couldn't persuade her and had to call Boss Li. However, Boss Li did not agree and warned her that she must stay in the hospital for a week according to the doctor's arrangement. After a week, she could go back after confirming that there was no problem. Otherwise, the gate of the base would never allow her to enter. The gate of the base would not be open for her, so she really couldn't go back. On the 4th day of Feng Ling's stay in the hospital, Xiao Su had to go out temporarily because of some private matters and would probably not be back until tomorrow. Feng Ling had just finished the atomization in the ward, returned the atomization equipment to the nurse, and was about to turn back to the ward when she suddenly heard a slightly familiar voice. "Aunt, don't always be angry with my cousin. Look at you, your heart has been uncomfortable for a long time. If she is stubborn, then so be it. Why are you angry? Isn't it obvious that you have a problem with your own body? There is nothing wrong with cousin Mingzhu liking a man. Besides, didn't we see Mr. Li the other day? I think he is really a good person, although he is a little cold and not easy to be close to. The colder a person is, the more serious he is, and the less annoying he is. And that Mr. Li is really handsome. You see, I grew up in the United States. What kind of big and tough man haven't I seen? But Mr. Li is not the kind of person who looks particularly big and muscular, but at a glance, I can tell that he is absolutely the type of person who is absolutely superb in both body and martial arts, and is particularly masculine. I feel that he has a particularly eye-catching aura. I don't know what it is, but anyway, as long as it is a girl, she should be tempted by him, let alone my cousin. Since she was a child, she has always thought that she would marry him, but in the end, she was rejected. And he even used my poor little cousin as an excuse, which made her more and more stubborn. In fact, I understand her feelings very well." Mrs. Feng's voice then came. "Tempted? Are you also tempted by that Li Nanheng?" Qin Shuk took Qin Xiu's arm and said with a smile, "Mr. Li is indeed very handsome, but after all, he is the person cousin Mingzhu likes. A rabbit doesn't eat the grass near its nest." No matter how handsome he is, he can't be tempted by his cousin's fiancée. If I really want to be tempted, I think that young man who is about the same age as me that day is more suitable for me. Qin Xiu smiled and rolled her eyes at her. What fiancé? The Li family has already cancelled this engagement. He is no longer a fiancé. He would rather nominally marry your poor little cousin who died early than marry your cousin Mingzhu. This matter is indeed a bit too much, but the Feng family has to unite with the Li family through marriage. Alas, I don't know what to do. Feng Ling didn't understand what they were talking about and didn't think about avoiding them. As a result, she suddenly met them in the corridor of this ward area. Qin Shuk was the first to see Feng Ling. When she saw Feng Ling, who was wearing a light blue hospital gown, and his fair, androgynous face was unbelievably handsome, she stared at Feng Ling's face in disbelief and said in surprise, "Just now, I said that I couldn't get his phone number, but I met him again." What? Qin Xiu didn't understand what she meant. She only saw her little niece's excited expression and suddenly turned to see Feng Ling standing there with a dumbfounded expression. Chapter 8:19. The moment she saw Feng Ling again, Qin Xiu was in a trance. The first time she saw him, she didn't have such a strong feeling, probably because her mother was by her side at that time. She had been worried about her mother's emotions, but this time, when she saw this young man, the inexplicable feeling of wanting to be close to him was particularly obvious. Qin Shuk grabbed her bag excitedly, raised her hand, and greeted Feng Ling with a smile. "Hi." Feng Ling was startled. Although she didn't feel particularly familiar with him, she still nodded instinctively, but there was no smile on her face. She was not good at interacting with strangers, let alone smiling at strangers, especially when there were no other acquaintances around her, so she instinctively covered herself with a layer of protective shield. "Little fresh meat, why are you in the hospital?" Qin Shuk asked, glanced at the hospital gown Feng Ling was wearing, and immediately asked in surprise, "What's wrong with you? Are you sick?" Feng Ling glanced at Mrs. Feng and then turned to Qin Shuk. "Nothing. There was a small accident. I need to stay in the hospital for a few days. I'm about to be discharged." With that, she paused and looked at Mrs. Feng, who seemed to have something in her eyes. "Mrs. Feng, is your heart not feeling well?" "Yes, you heard our conversation just now, right?" Mrs. Feng looked at her with a smile. Feng Ling nodded and still stood in place. Mrs. Feng took Qin Shuk by her side and walked over to her. When she came closer, she could see Feng Ling's face more clearly. The young man in front of him was still fair and clean, but he wasn't wearing the cold black combat suit today. Instead, he was wearing a light blue patient's gown. It was as if the cold and indifferent young man had softened, making him look very approachable. Of course, if this young man's expression wasn't so cold and calm, people would want to get close to him. "My heart has been uncomfortable for more than 10 years. I'll be fine with some medicine in the hospital." With that, Mrs. Feng looked at the nearby doors. "Are you staying in this ward? Which one are you staying in?" Feng Ling looked at her and did not speak. Mrs. Feng saw her guarded heart and said gently, "We are old friends with Mr. Li. You are a member of 11 Base and have helped us. Since you are staying in the hospital and we met here, it can be considered a rare fate. It's okay if it's not convenient. But what do you usually like to eat? Do you like chicken soup? I'll make some myself tomorrow and put it in a thermos cup and have Shuk send it to you." "No need, Madame Feng is too polite." "There's no need to be polite. This is what I should do." Madame Feng's gaze was gentle as she watched Feng Ling's face. "Perhaps I really do have some fate with you. Every time I meet you, I feel an indescribable sense of closeness in my heart. You may not believe it, but you bear some resemblance to me when I was young." Feng Ling completely treated Madame Feng's words as mere courtesy. She only curved her lips slightly, but the smile did not reach her eyes. She did not take it to heart. Qin Xiu looked at Feng Ling's face and remembered that her mother often talked about this boy these days. There was an indescribable feeling in her heart. It was very warm. You don't have to be too polite to my aunt. You don't have to be too polite to my aunt. My aunt is very kind to everyone. You see, I'm just her niece, but I've been spoiled by her since I was a child. She treats others the same way. Since you've helped my grandma and aunt, they will definitely remember your kindness. Since you're in the hospital, if you don't have any relatives around you, I'll bring you chicken soup. Although my aunt is the madam of the Feng family, she can make good soup. It's very delicious. Feng Ling looked at Madame Feng, and Madame Feng was also looking at her. As she looked at her, her eyes seemed to be filled with emotion. Feng Ling had to withdraw her gaze. Considering that it was not good to stand in the corridor like this, she pointed to the ward not far away. If Madame Feng is not feeling well, then come to my ward. There is a sofa inside. You can rest. Okay. Qin Xiu immediately agreed. Qin Shuk had never seen her aunt talk so happily with an outsider. Looking at Feng Ling's beautiful face, her heart surged with all kinds of joy, and she followed them in with a smile. After entering the ward, Feng Ling glanced at the sofa and saw that it was very clean and there was nothing piled up, so she simply returned to the bedside. When she looked back, she saw that they had come in. She really didn't know how to get along with strangers, so she could only choose to turn around to pick up disposable paper cups, pour 2 cups of warm water, and put them on the small table next to the coffee table. The sunlight shone in from the window and fell on Feng Ling's face, making the boy's face look extremely soft. From this angle, Madame Feng seemed to vaguely see the boy's collarbone exposed by the collar of the hospital gown, which was so slender that it seemed to be the bones of a boy. Young people may not be particularly clear, but Qin Xiu's uncle used to be a very famous orthopedic doctor in the United States. When she was very young, she heard from her uncle that men and women, no matter their age, had different bone thickness and some details. This boy's collarbone, Madame Feng's eyes fell on the boy's hand again. It was also slender and white, many times better than a man's hand, but because of long-term training in holding a gun, no matter how white and tender it was, there would be a thin layer of callus on the palm, but it was not very obvious. When she continued to look carefully, Feng Ling had turned to the other side to pick up her cell phone. Looking at this boy who was also much thinner than other men of the same age, Qin Xiu wanted to take a closer look, but at this time, a nurse came in to deliver medicine, interrupting the doubts in her mind. "Aunt, let's go sit over there." Qin Shuk helped her to the sofa, then turned to see that the nurse had turned to go out after delivering the medicine. When the ward was quiet again, she took small steps to come up to Feng Ling. Feng Ling turned around and suddenly saw Qin Shuk approaching, and her eyes froze. Looking at the girl who was only about 3 centimeters shorter than her, she didn't quite understand what was going on with her enthusiastic expression. "Miss Qin, I clearly got your cell phone number last time, but you snatched it and deleted it," Qin Shuk said regretfully. "Is your 11 base really so strict? You can't even tell your cell phone number to outsiders?" Chapter 820. Qin Shuk said with a look of pity, "I see. Can't we do it secretly?" Feng Ling's expression remained the same. The rules of the base are obeyed. Nothing can be done secretly. Seeing such a serious expression, Qin Shuk immediately pulled a long face and said, "It seems that I should ask cousin Mingzhu to pursue Li Nanheng as soon as possible. When he becomes my cousin-in-law, it will be much easier for me to get familiar with the people in the base. Now I can't even ask for your number. How can it be so strict? It's really too strict." Feng Ling's eyes remained unchanged, but she looked at her steadily. "Who is cousin Mingzhu? What do you mean by cousin-in-law?" It was rare to see this little fresh meat who was indifferent to everything in front of her seem to be interested in something, so Qin Shuk directly answered, "Cousin Mingzhu is my aunt's daughter. Your boss Li Nanheng is my cousin's fiancé and will marry my cousin in the future. So I said he will be my future cousin-in-law." Feng Ling glanced at her again. "Is that so?" Yes, don't you know that your boss Lee had an engagement with the Feng family when he was very young? Oh, yes, your base is usually so strict. I don't think he will casually say this kind of private thing, but he will definitely marry my cousin in the future. Madame Feng listened behind. She should explain that Li Nanheng had cancelled the engagement with her eldest daughter, Mingzhu, but seeing that Feng Ling seemed to have a rare interaction with Qin Shuk, and Shuk seemed to like him very much, she simply didn't interrupt. Feng Ling's eyes paused on Qin Shuk for a moment. She didn't know what kind of strange emotion suddenly sank in her heart, but she instinctively wanted to confirm whether her words were true or false. After looking at her for a moment, when Qin Shuk blinked at her with a smile, Feng Ling expressionlessly looked away and returned to the bed to sit down. Seeing that Feng Ling's complexion looked normal except for a little pale, and seeing that Feng Ling's pace when returning to the ward was very steady, Qin Shuk simply pulled the chair by the bed to sit down and reached out to pick up the phone by the bed. Miss Qin, have you forgotten what I just said? Feng Ling reminded her. Qin Shuk did want to use Feng Ling's phone to call her again so that she could remember the number, but seeing Feng Ling's serious expression, she could only put the phone back. Then I don't want your cell phone number. Can you tell me your name? Qin Shuk's eyes were shining. Anyway, she refused to do it so easily. Feng Ling was a little helpless. After Boss Li's advice last time, she also knew that this little girl named Qin Shuk must have fallen in love with someone else. Not to mention that Feng Ling didn't have any plans to fall in love with anyone at all. Besides, how could two women fall in love? Don't be so silent all the time. Seeing that she intended to continue to hide her identity, Qin Shuk hurriedly reached out to grab Feng Ling's hand, but Feng Ling reacted quickly and instantly moved her hand away. In the end, Qin Shuk could only catch a corner of her sleeve. This scene made Mrs. Feng, Qin Xiu, who was sitting on the sofa, feel a little pitiful. Qin Xiu sighed softly. Shuk, it's not the first time you've seen this little brother. He seems to be so introverted. He can't stand the pestering of a crazy girl like you. Come here obediently. Don't pester him. Qin Shuk sat there unwillingly. She grabbed Feng Ling's sleeve and looked up at the beautiful and calm young man sitting on the bed. She whispered pleadingly, then, tell me your name. I definitely won't pester you. Otherwise, I'll be curious to death. Probably seeing Feng Ling's scruples, Mrs. Feng got up and came over. She was about to speak when out of the corner of her eye, she suddenly caught a glimpse of the patient number and medical records at the end of the bed. When she glanced at Feng Ling's name, she was stunned and her eyes fell on Feng Ling's face again. Your surname is Feng? Qin Xiu stared at her face firmly. Because of Mrs. Qin's gaze, Feng Ling turned to look at her and glanced at the medical records at the end of the bed. Since this was the case, there was nothing to hide, so she said lightly, yes, it's a coincidence. My surname is also Feng. Qin Xiu's eyes trembled, and then she looked at her name again. When she saw the line, Feng Ling, and the surname, male, age 16, the excitement in her eyes faded a little. Feng Ling? Which Ling? Ling as in Ling. Feng Ling. Qin Xiu looked at her face. At this moment, because Feng Ling was sitting upright by the bed, her collar was closed, and her collarbone and skin under the collar could not be seen. However, Qin Xiu had a vague feeling that, a very, very strong feeling. In the United States, especially in Los Angeles, there are not many Chinese surnamed Feng. There are only a few families who often have contact with our Feng family, but why don't I know you, Mrs. Feng? I am an orphan. My name was just temporarily given to me by the person who adopted me, so I'm not sure what my surname should be, Feng Ling explained simply. This kind of coincidence can only be regarded as a coincidence. I don't even know who my parents are, let alone what their surnames are. Qin Xiu's words were interrupted by Feng Ling's cold words. Her expression froze and her eyes couldn't help but dim. I see. Feng Ling? Qin Shuk blinked. Feng Ling, right? What a nice name. It sounds cold and cool. It matches your temperament very well. Feng Ling. Because of this name, Qin Xiu found an opportunity to chat with Feng Ling for a while, but she couldn't get any information from Feng Ling. Qin Shuk always interjected, and the topic was intermittent. In the end, they talked about why Feng Ling was hospitalized. When she learned that Feng Ling was accidentally injured when on a mission in 11 Base, she didn't ask more. After all, she knew that the matters of 11 Base were confidential, and she really shouldn't keep embarrassing this little boy. Qin Xiu asked Qin Shuk to go downstairs to buy some fruit. Qin Shuk got up and was about to go out to buy it. Even if Feng Ling tried to stop her, she couldn't persuade them. Chapter 8:21. Feng Ling didn't understand what Mrs. Feng meant, so she just raised her head and looked at her seriously. What do you want to ask, Mrs. Feng? Are you really a boy? Madame Feng probably felt that her question was too abrupt and disrespectful to him. When she spoke, her expression was apologetic and tactful. Don't think too much. It's only because your child is too beautiful that Feng Ling's expression remained unchanged and her eyes were calm. You don't have to be sorry. I'm often misunderstood in the base, probably because I'm much thinner and smaller than my peers. It's normal for me to be misunderstood in this regard. Mrs. Feng froze. So you mean, I'm a man, Feng Ling answered without hesitation. Mrs. Feng looked at her and couldn't say anything, but she felt a little unwilling, so she could only look at her. You, Mrs. Feng, just now Miss Qin said that your heart is not feeling well. As you can see in my ward, I really don't have anything to entertain you. When Miss Qin comes back, let her send you home to rest. I'm still recovering and need to rest. Feng Ling didn't intend to say too much and directly asked her to leave. Qin Xiu had lived for so long. How could she not see the indifference, alienation, and vigilance in this boy's nature, and how could she not hear the meaning of expulsion in her words? She just instinctively felt that maybe her question was too abrupt, so she could only smile at Feng Ling apologetically. Sorry. Feng Ling just looked at her indifferently, neither smiling nor annoyed. Say hello to Granny for me. The mountain is high and the road is long. We just pass by each other. I don't think we'll meet again in the future. In fact, my mother likes you very much. If you want, you can visit her often. My mother doesn't have any children at home, and you say you are an orphan. Maybe she can recognize you as, Mrs. Feng, thank you for your kindness, but I'm used to being alone. Feng Ling interrupted her again. Qin Xiu didn't know what to say, so she shut her mouth awkwardly and sat on the sofa waiting for Qin Shuk to come back. During this period, Feng Ling received a call from the base. Tam asked her if she lacked anything in the hospital. After the afternoon training, he could buy it for her and send it over. Feng Ling did not say anything and simply chatted about the base for a few days before hanging up. During this period, neither of them spoke much. When their eyes met, Mrs. Qin smiled at her lightly. Feng Ling still looked at her calmly and then retracted her gaze. She picked up the base manual that Xiao Su had given her a few days ago and sat on the bed to casually flip through it to kill time. Qin Shuk didn't know where she went to buy fruit. She went out for more than 20 minutes but still didn't come back. Qin Xiu had just taken the sedative medicine prescribed by the doctor in the consultation room. After sitting on the sofa for a while, she supported her head with one hand and closed her eyes to take a nap. Unknowingly, she leaned against the sofa and fell asleep. In her dream, the endless dark sea mercilessly swallowed the crying baby girl in the swaddling clothes. In an instant, the child disappeared from the sea, and the rolling waves roared wildly like a beast. No matter how she stood on the wet deck and cried wildly, the child still disappeared in the huge waves of the sea. Feng Ling didn't like people who made her feel strange in her place. This would make her very uncomfortable. She had been used to being alone since she was a child, so she endured it for a long time. Even though she knew that Mrs. Feng didn't mean any harm and was just waiting for Qin Shuk to come back, she still turned to look at Mrs. Qin, who was sleeping on the sofa and suddenly had a forehead full of sweat. Feng Ling didn't know if Mrs. Qin was feeling unwell or something. After reading for a while, she put down the manual in her hand, lifted the quilt on the sickbed, and got out of bed. When she walked over, she saw that Mrs. Feng had been tightly holding the old scarf on her shoulder when she fell asleep. Looking at the scarf, Feng Ling inexplicably wanted to touch it, but her reason made her restrain her hand and gently placed her hand on Mrs. Feng's forehead. "My child." Mrs. Feng suddenly opened her eyes the moment Feng Ling's hand touched her. Her eyes were so frightened that they seemed to have lost focus. However, she stared at a certain point in the room for a long time until her eyes slowly regained focus. When she saw the person standing in front of her, she looked at Feng Ling's face in a trance. "Mrs. Feng, did you have a nightmare?" Feng Ling asked indifferently and moved her hand away from her forehead. Qin Xiu looked at her for a while before she seemed to return to herself and her expression gradually calmed down. "Yes, I had a nightmare. I've had this nightmare over and over again all these years. I didn't expect that I would fall asleep sitting here. Did I forget myself just now?" "No." After speaking, Feng Ling glanced at the scarf on her shoulder. "Although it's a bit cold in this season, the wind hasn't picked up yet. Madame Feng has been wearing a scarf indoors. Don't you feel too hot?" What she wanted to say was that she saw Mrs. Feng wearing this scarf the last time she met her, and this time, she saw it again, and this scarf was very old, but it was really inappropriate and impolite to say this, so Feng Ling didn't say it. Qin Xiu smiled and touched the scarf on her shoulder. "This scarf was my second daughter's favorite when she was a child. The wind was very strong in the autumn when she was born. Every time I took her out, I would gently cover her face with this scarf to prevent the sand from blowing into her eyes. Later, I found that every time she cried, as long as I put this scarf on her face, she would smile, and then," Qin Xiu paused, omitted those past events, and said with a smile, "Later, I got used to keeping this scarf on me all the time. In fact, this scarf used to be red, but now after so many years, it has been washed too many times, and the color has turned yellow. Do you think this scarf is very old and ugly? No, everyone has a thing that carries a story. This scarf has been with you for so many years, it can be seen that Mrs. Feng must love your second daughter very much." After speaking, Feng Ling did not say more. After confirming that she was fine, she turned and was about to return to the bed. "Feng Ling," Mrs. Feng suddenly called her. Feng Ling turned back to look at her. The moment their eyes met, Madame Feng could not help but pinch the scarf around her shoulders. She looked at her with deep emotion. "It's all right. Earlier, I suddenly had something to ask you, but I suddenly forgot." Feng Ling looked at her in confusion. It was not until the door of the ward suddenly opened that she withdrew her gaze and turned to the other side. Dash. Chapter 822. When the door of the ward opened, the first person to walk in was a beautiful woman whom Feng Ling found unfamiliar. She glanced at the person who came in and then saw Qin Shuk who followed her in. "Aunt, I just met cousin Mingzhu downstairs in the hospital. She knew you were angry with her again. She was afraid that you would hurt your health, so she specially came to see you. Please don't be angry with her." Qin Shuk winked at Feng Ling and then turned her eyes to Mrs. Feng, whose face instantly darkened. So this was Mrs. Feng's daughter, Feng Mingzhu? Boss Li's fiancé? Feng Ling's gaze met Feng Mingzhu's. Feng Mingzhu only glanced at her indifferently, gave her a polite smile, and then walked past her. When she walked past, Feng Ling could clearly smell the faint, noble perfume on Feng Mingzhu's body. It smelled very good. It was a very elegant fragrance that made one feel unattainable with just a sniff. "Mom, I didn't mean to make you unhappy, but this kind of big event, since it has been decided a long time ago, it's normal for me to suddenly cancel it." Feng Mingzhu walked up to Qin Xiu and sat down next to her. She wrapped her hands around Qin Xiu's arm, put her chin on her shoulder, and said coquettishly, "Don't be angry. He is the only person I really like in my life. I really don't want to give up. I'll talk to the elders of the Lee family and ask them to take back their plan to cancel the engagement, okay? Qin Xiu didn't like to talk about family affairs in front of outsiders. She didn't want to say that the Lee family broke off the engagement directly, so she just secretly glared at her daughter next to her. You came here because of this, not because you're afraid that I'll be angry, but because you're afraid that I'll stand on the same side as your father and grandfather and really agree to cancel the engagement. Feng Mingzhu was a little helpless. Mom, I've said it. Anyway, I won't cancel it. I'm going to marry Li Nanheng. You, Aya, cousin, you should go home and say this to Aunt. My little brother Feng Ling is here. He is Mr. Li's subordinate. Aren't you afraid that these words will be spread to his ears? Qin Shuk giggled and moved closer to Feng Ling's side. At the same time, she said, right, little brother Feng Ling? Feng Ling's little brother expressed. I won't casually spread such irrelevant topics. However, it's indeed better to discuss Madame Feng's family matters at home. After all, I'm an outsider. Besides, this is a ward. That's right. Even if cousin Mingzhu is eager to get married, don't tell everyone you meet that you have to marry into the Li family. In the future, how will our little brother Feng Ling look at his boss, Feng Ling? She didn't know that Boss Li had such a thing to deal with. She almost couldn't look at him anymore, okay? Qin Xiu sighed. Obviously, she didn't want Feng Mingzhu to continue to be so willful. She said helplessly, let's not talk about this for now. Since you're in the hospital, you should stop. Usually, your family spoils and spoils you. Now your father and grandfather's decision is also for your own good. After saying this, Qin Xiu lowered her voice and said, if you marry into the Li family and that boy Li Nanheng really has no feelings for you, will you be a widow for the rest of your life? What we want to see is that you can live a happy life, not sit in the cold palace blindly for the sake of pursuing a love, understand? Feng Mingzhu looked very calm, but it was not difficult to see that she was a very stubborn person. She insisted, but the Li family would rather marry my dead sister Cenotaph than marry me. Isn't this a blatant insult to me? Why should I let them insult me like this? The more they do this, the more I want to marry them. Child, why are you always so immature? Qin Xiu's face suddenly became cold. They said that they wanted to marry your sister Cenotaph just to fulfill the agreement of the marriage. On the one hand, the agreement would be fulfilled, and on the other hand, you would be able to marry a man who can really make you happy. It seems that the Li family is quite thoughtful, and they have politely asked for our opinion. Why do you have to be so extreme? I'm not extreme. I'd rather marry a dead person than marry a living one. I can't bear this insult. Feng Mingzhu was provoked by these words, and her original calm appearance faded. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. I have to let them know that I, Feng Mingzhu, am not a person who can be so perfunctory. Qin Xiu immediately glared at her fiercely. What did you say? Feng Mingzhu's expression froze. Only then did she realize that she had said something she shouldn't have said and violated her mother's taboo. She immediately withdrew her hand from Qin Xiu's arm and looked very angry, but she didn't dare to say anything else. Her sister died in the sea before she was 1 year old, but she couldn't mention the word death for so many years. At this time, Feng Ling's eyes fell on the mother and daughter who seemed to be not very happy. Although Mrs. Feng, Qin Xiu, lowered her voice, her natural acuity and her extremely sensitive hearing, which had been trained since she was a child, allowed her to hear these words clearly. Would rather marry a cenotaph? She would rather marry a dead man? Did she hear wrong, or did the eldest daughter of the Feng family say something wrong? Little brother Feng Ling, at this time, Qin Shuk leaned close to her ear and said, don't laugh at me. My cousin and my aunt usually talk like this. My aunt is relatively strict with my cousin's education. My cousin grew up under the pressure of the family and has a rebellious temperament, so as long as they talk about something, they will act like this. They don't seem happy, but my aunt only has one precious daughter, my cousin, and in fact, she loves her very much. Feng Ling paused. Although she knew that it had nothing to do with her and she shouldn't ask, there was still an inexplicable question in her heart. She turned to look at Qin Shuk, who had been pestering her, and asked in a low voice, "Is she the only daughter?" "But why did I just hear Mrs. Feng mention your second daughter?" Qin Shuk simply leaned close to Feng Ling's ear and whispered a few words. When Feng Ling's eyes gradually became clear, she retreated and then said with a smile, "Little brother Feng Ling, what brand of shower gel do you usually use? Why do I feel that you smell better than me?" Chapter 8:23. Although she knew that Qin Shuk was just doing this out of kindness, Feng Ling was still not used to being approached like this. Qin Shuk didn't continue to pester her and only said, "Are you going to stay in the hospital for a few more days?" "Then I have nothing to do these days. I'll come to the hospital often to accompany you, okay?" As she spoke, she seemed to have thought of something. She turned around and brought in 2 big bags of fruits that were placed on the bench outside the ward. "These are the fruits I bought just now. I almost forgot when I was talking with cousin Mingzhu outside the ward. I don't know what you like to eat, so I bought a lot of them. You can choose whatever you like." "Really, no need." Before Feng Ling finished speaking, Qin Shuk enthusiastically put the fruits on the square table by the bed and took out the fruit knife and disposable fruit plate she bought together and began to cut the fruits. Feng Mingzhu and Mrs. Feng didn't have a pleasant conversation. After sitting on the sofa for a while, Mrs. Feng got up and said that she was leaving. Feng Mingzhu didn't look very good, but she still got up obediently. "Little brother, we're leaving. I just wanted to see you, but I didn't expect that my daughter's problem hasn't been solved yet. Sorry to disturb you." After speaking, Mrs. Feng didn't wait for Feng Ling to speak and turned to leave. It could be seen that she was really in a bad mood. Just now, Feng Ling only noticed Qin Shuk, who had been cutting the fruits, and didn't pay much attention to what the 2 mothers were talking about. She didn't know why she was unhappy, so she could only nod as a farewell. However, after they went out, Qin Shuk gently put the cut fruits on the fruit plate, took Feng Ling's hand, and told her to do the aerosol treatment on time, to listen to the doctor's words, and to rest more. She nagged a lot, and in the end, Feng Ling had to personally send them into the elevator, and then because Qin Shuk was unwilling to let go of her hand, she sent them to the main entrance hall on the first floor of the hospital. It was raining outside. The rain was not heavy, and they could walk a few steps to get into the car. No one took an umbrella. Seeing that it was raining outside, Qin Shuk didn't continue to pull Feng Ling out. She turned back and reluctantly said goodbye to Feng Ling. Although the rain was not heavy, some light rain still drifted in and landed on Feng Ling's head. In just 2 or 3 minutes, her clean and soft short hair was slightly wet on her forehead, but it made her calm and fair face look even more handsome and exquisite. And the loose light blue hospital gown on Feng Ling's body, coupled with Feng Ling's slightly gentler expression, really made Qin Shuk's heart pound wildly. Feng Ling. Qin Shuk was about to get into the car. After thinking for a while, she turned and ran back to Feng Ling. She didn't know if it was because she ran too fast or because she was simply blushing, but she panted and said, "Can I come to the hospital to see you tomorrow?" Feng Ling looked at the mischievous little girl in front of her. For the first time in so many years, she was a little upset about her gender. It seemed like she was about to hurt a girl's heart. However, there shouldn't be too many opportunities to meet in the future. If it was just a simple love, it would be much better than finding out the truth. I'm not sure if the doctor allows me to see people often, and the base also has some rules. If it's not necessary, Miss Qin, you'd better not come, Feng Ling said euphemistically. The taste of being rejected was always not good. Although she knew that Feng Ling would definitely not agree, hearing such a straightforward answer, Qin Shuk was still a little disappointed. She lowered her head, raised her hand, and tugged at Feng Ling's cuff weakly. Then I can't see you again in the future. Feng Ling looked at the little girl's white and delicate fingertips and was about to push her hand away when Qin Shuk suddenly clenched her cuff. How about this? I won't disturb you these days. but on the day you leave the hospital, I'll come to see you, okay? Miss Chin, it's still raining outside. Let's talk about it later. If you keep standing like this, you will catch a cold. Fong Ling didn't answer but calmly reminded her. Chin Shuk's eyes lit up at this moment. She wanted to say that if she caught a cold, she could take this opportunity to get an injection or be hospitalized in the hospital, so that she could get close to him. But when the words came to her mouth, she saw that Fong Ling didn't seem to be interested in her at all, so she had to shut her mouth and reluctantly let go of Fong Ling's sleeve. Then I'll go back with my aunt and cousin first. If we have a chance to meet again in the future, I'll ask for your phone number. Can you give it to me? Next time? There shouldn't be a next time, right? Fong Ling just smiled lightly. Then let's talk about it next time. As if hearing a glimmer of hope from such hopeless words, Chin Shuk immediately grinned, turned, and ran back to the car quickly. She then turned back to wave at Fong Ling and entered the car. The tall black Hummer galloped in the rain and stopped in front of the hospital. When Li Nanheng rolled down the window, he saw such a scene. The girl stood in the rain and reluctantly tugged at the sleeves of the boy, and then the boy seemed to promise her something. The girl blushed and happily turned to run to the car not far away. On the passenger seat of the Hummer, there was a tablet that had not been turned off. On it was a video conference of the base that had just ended. The screen was dark, and the conference had just ended a minute ago. Li Nanheng, who had opened the window to light a cigarette, played with the silver lighter in his left hand, glanced indifferently at the boy standing in front of the hospital, and his dark eyes darkened, and even a lot of coldness entered his eyes. The phone rang at this time. It was Xiao Su. Li Nanheng took a look at it and picked it up. Speak. Boss, I don't think I can come back tonight. I don't think Fong Ling has a big problem in the hospital. If you are worried, ask Kay and the others to come to accompany him, Xiao Su said apologetically. Xiao Su said apologetically, but Fong Ling doesn't like staying in the hospital. He pays attention to the matters in the base. If there's a mission, he'll definitely rush back to the base even if the treatment period hasn't ended. It's good to send someone to watch over him, in case he always thinks of himself as an invincible soldier. The treatment hasn't ended yet, but he can't wait to go back to train and take on missions. Well, I'm near the hospital. I'll be here tonight. Li Nanheng's tone was cold. Chapter 824. Seeing that the car Chin Shuk took had driven away, Nanheng pressed the lighter with a pa sound, pushed open the door, got out of the car, threw the lighter in his hand back into the car, and walked straight to the boy in front of the hospital. Summer was almost over, and the autumn rain in Los Angeles was a little cold, so today, Li Nanheng was dressed differently from before. He wore a black double-breasted trench coat over a well-ironed suit. His whole body exuded coolness and arrogance, and his cold and flawless face, like that of an ancient Roman royal family, attracted countless gazes outside the hospital in just a few seconds. But before the group of people outside the hospital came back to their senses, the handsome man had already walked up the marble stairs in front of the hospital, dragged the collar of the boy in a light blue hospital gown over, and said coldly and indifferently, "Have you forgotten what I said to you? Members of the base are forbidden to fall in love. Do you want to be driven out of the base, or do you have a brain that only knows how to talk about love at such a young age?" Fong Ling's collar was almost pressed against her head by the man's sudden tug. The moment she turned back, she saw Li Nanheng's unhappy expression and couldn't help but explain. Mrs. Fong came to the hospital for a checkup. Miss Chin accompanied her here and met her in the hospital. What a coincidence. Nanheng snorted and continued to drag her in. Being dragged by the collar, Fong Ling's footsteps were not very steady, and she said helplessly, "It's true. What's more coincidental is that I also saw your fiancé today, boss." Nanheng didn't stop at all. He dragged her into the elevator, pressed the button to close the door of the elevator in the floor where Fong Ling's ward was, and glanced at her coldly. "What fiancé?" Fong Ling hurriedly raised her hand to adjust her collar that had been slightly loosened. As she did so, she said, "It's Mrs. Feng's daughter. I think her name is Feng Mingzhu. They said she's Boss Li's fiancée, isn't she?" Li Nanheng didn't take Feng Mingzhu's matter to heart at all, but when the word fiancé suddenly came out of Feng Ling's mouth, he felt a little uncomfortable. He glanced at the boy who was a head shorter than him. "So what if I am? So what if I'm not?" "Nothing much. I just said that their whole family came to the hospital today, and I coincidentally met them." "It's not what you think, boss." Feng Ling's tone was as usual. Li Nanheng glanced at her indifferently. "If I really marry Feng Mingzhu in 2 years, what do you think?" Feng Ling was silent for a moment before answering calmly, "What do I think? Of course, it's to wish you and the future Mrs. Li a happy marriage and a son soon." Feng Ling happened to raise her head as she spoke, her eyes bright and beautiful. "But boss, do you like Miss Feng or that Miss Qin? Since we're really going to get married, I think it's better to be faithful. I see that you seem to mind Miss Qin very much. Then Miss Feng." The two of them were on completely different channels. The veins on Li Nanheng's forehead throbbed. "When did I say that I minded that Qin shook? Boss, don't you dislike her being too close to me? If I'm not interested in her, could it be that I'm not allowed to fall in love?" Li Nanheng was so angry that he laughed. Then he glanced at Feng Ling with a sneer and strode out when the elevator stopped on the floor where the ward was. Feng Ling looked at his back with a confused expression and followed him out. When they were about to return to the ward, Li Nanheng turned back to look at her. Seeing that she was walking slowly, he reached out to grab her wrist and dragged her into the ward. The moment the door was slammed shut with a pang sound, before Feng Ling could react, she was abruptly pressed against the door. The man's hand was firmly pressed against her shoulder and could not be moved. Feng Ling looked at the man standing close to her in a daze. She wanted to struggle but couldn't. "Boss?" The man looked down at the fair-skinned boy, glanced at the boy's short hair that was slightly wet because of the rain, and said with a deep gaze, "In the future, don't listen to rumors. I don't have a fiancé. Don't put such unnecessary labels on me, understand?" Feng Ling. "I didn't label you, boss. I just heard it. As long as you don't hear it from my own mouth, everything you hear is nonsense. My own life and my own marriage won't follow the bullshit arrangements of my family. Feng Mingzhu, that kind of rich young lady, isn't my cup of tea. Just looking at her makes me lose my appetite. In the future, don't mention this name in front of me. Okay? Remember what I said." What? No matter now or many years later, no matter in the base or anywhere else, as long as you don't hear it from me, don't take it seriously. This is the same for everyone. Don't listen to anyone's hearsay." Feng Ling looked at the warning and seriousness in Li Nanheng's eyes and nodded sincerely. "I see." Seeing that Feng Ling really remembered it, Nanheng turned on the light switch on the wall by the door, and the lights in the room instantly turned on. Feng Ling was not used to the sudden light. She narrowed her eyes slightly and moved her head aside. The man lowered his eyes and saw the fluffy hair by the boy's ear, which made his heart itch. He was really a guy who could always make people's hearts itch. Nanheng pulled his hand away from the door behind her with a cold face, ignored the boy's blank and innocent expression, and said lightly, "Xiao Su won't go back to the hospital today. I just went to the Li Corporation to attend a meeting this morning and passed by the hospital. I'll stay with you tonight." No wonder boss was dressed so formally today. He didn't look like he just came from the base. It turned out that he went to the Li Corporation. She had never seen boss in a suit like this. Many years ago in the orphanage, she just caught a glimpse of him. However, when Li Nanheng wore a suit, he looked different from other elite men. Although he was dressed in a suit, he still looked tough and ruffian, which was a different kind of handsomeness. When they got out of the elevator, Feng Ling noticed that when several nurses passed by looked in Li Nanheng's direction, their faces were all red with shyness and infatuation. But at that time, it was Nanheng who suddenly carried her back to the ward that ruined this handsome feeling. It was still so rough that she had nothing to say. Dash. Chapter 825. Li Nanheng looked back and was about to speak when he suddenly saw that Feng Ling seemed to be looking at his clothes. He expressionlessly took off his trench coat, threw it on the sofa, and casually pulled open the collar of his shirt. It was just a simple and casual action of quickly taking off his clothes, but there was an inexplicable hint of wildness in his manliness, causing Feng Ling's gaze to stiffen. "What are you looking at?" Nanheng glanced at her coldly again. Feng Ling quickly looked away and walked away from the door quickly. When she was about to return to the bed, she suddenly heard the man say, "What? Look at your attitude. Are you not convinced?" "No." Feng Ling tidied up her slightly messy collar and said, "But boss, you really don't have to be unhappy because of the matter between me and Miss Qin. I don't have any feelings for an innocent little girl like Miss Qin, but she doesn't have any bad intentions, so I can't hurt her heart too much." "Hurt a little girl's heart?" Nanheng raised his eyebrows and looked at the young man who had already tidied up his hospital gown. The young man's face was clearly very likable, but he was usually too cold and heartless, but he showed a little rare patience to a little girl. He sneered coldly and casually unbuttoned the exquisite and expensive cuffs of his shirt. In the end, opposites attract each other. It's rare for you to be soft-hearted. Feng Ling just smiled, and her short black hair, which had just been wet by the raindrops, fell on her forehead. "Boss, if you have to think so crooked, then I can't help it. I always remember the rules and regulations of the base and will not violate the rules." "Okay, remember what you said." Nanheng didn't continue to harp on this matter. After glancing at Feng Ling, he unbuttoned his shirt, took it off, and went into the bathroom bare-chested. Since the last time she saw Boss Li directly take off his clothes here, Feng Ling had been used to it, but she still looked away. Not long after, Li Nanheng changed his clothes and came out. When she turned back, she noticed that he had only changed his suit and shirt. In the bathroom of her ward, there was the suit he changed out of last time. After washing it, he sent it back here. Feng Ling didn't know where to put it, so she simply threw it in the closet in the bathroom. It was just a set of clothes, and he actually remembered that it was here. Should he say that boss's memory was too good, or that he didn't take it away because he had other intentions? However, even if he had other intentions, what else could he be after? Feng Ling didn't understand why this thought popped up in her mind. Li Nanheng came out and approached her. Ignoring the strange emotion that flashed across Feng Ling's eyes, he asked mildly, "Have you done the atomization today?" Feng Ling knew that he was no longer angry, so she didn't continue to argue about Qin Shuk. She glanced sideways at the rain outside the window, took a small step to the side, and instinctively kept a relatively safe distance from him. She answered, "Yes, I've done it. From this morning to just now, I've done it twice. The doctor said I'm recovering well." Just as Nanheng was about to say something, the door of the ward was suddenly knocked, and then a young nurse came in. When the nurse saw two good-looking men standing inside, one tall and one thin, although it was not the first time she had seen them, she still couldn't help blushing. After all, she had come in with the chief doctor several times before, but today she came in alone. "That. Mr. Feng, the doctor asked you to go to his consultation room. He wants to check your lungs and wounds again." The nurse stuttered while glancing at them from time to time. They were obviously two extremely rare men, but even though their auras were completely different, there seemed to be something even colder than indifference in their bones. Furthermore, although that tall man's gaze towards her wasn't impolite, that icy rain-like coldness really made her shiver. It was so cold that she didn't even dare to say what she wanted to say next. She hurriedly shut her mouth, turned around, and quickly walked out, not daring to look back. "Are you hostile to all the girls in the world?" Feng Ling couldn't help asking. "The nurse came to inform me to go to the consultation room." "How did she offend you? Why did you glare at her like that?" Li Nanheng withdrew his cold gaze toward the door and said indifferently, "Did I glare at her? If you didn't, would the nurse be so scared that she ran away with her tail between her legs? Then she must have seen wrongly." The man's expression didn't change. Feng Ling, she couldn't stand this man in front of her, so she turned around and was about to go out. As soon as she turned around and took 2 steps, the back of her collar was grabbed again. Li Nanheng put one hand in his black trouser pocket and grabbed her collar with the other, like a devil who could stretch out its claws at any time. As long as he was unhappy, he would never let go of the puppet in his hand easily. The man's expression was cold and arrogant. "I'll accompany you to the consultation room. It's very cold in the corridor. Put on a coat and then go." Feng Ling thought that even if he wanted to accompany her to the consultation room, he didn't have to grab her collar again and again, right? Fortunately, she still had a loose vest inside. Otherwise, if she was pulled like this, sooner or later, he would find the breast wrap inside. She twitched the corner of her mouth and calmly turned to pick up the new coat that Xiao Su had bought for her. When she put it on, she saw that Li Nanheng seemed to be satisfied with her eyes, so she finally went out. When she went out in the corridor, she was inevitably baptized by the gazes of a group of nurses. Feng Ling walked forward expressionlessly, and Li Nanheng walked past her without shifting his gaze an inch. Although the 2 men were walking together, for some reason, the group of nurses blushed and their hearts beat so fast that they felt that they were very compatible. Was it because of their height and figure? That's not right. Usually, the cutest height difference in everyone's eyes should be tall and big, while the girl is petite and exquisite. However, this slightly shorter and thinner little fresh meat next to him definitely looked more than 165 centimeters tall. He definitely wasn't the cute type. But they really matched each other inexplicably. "Boss, when you walk with me in the future, can you keep a little distance?" When they were about to walk to the consultation room, Feng Ling suddenly said in a low voice. Li Nanheng lowered his eyes and glanced at her. "What distance?" Chapter 826. What's wrong with that? Stop talking nonsense. The man put his arm around her shoulder coldly. At the moment when Feng Ling paused, he pushed her into the door of the consulting room. "Go in and have a check. Don't talk nonsense." Feng Ling stayed in the consultation room for a full 40 minutes before coming out. Li Nanheng first smoked 2 cigarettes in the only smoking room in the corridor of the hospital. Feeling that it was almost time, he threw the cigarette butts into the fireproof trash can and strode out. As soon as he walked near the consulting room, he saw the door open and Feng Ling came out. She seemed to be in good condition. "What did the doctor say?" "He just said that I'm recovering well." Feng Ling raised her eyes. "Boss, the doctor has said more than once that I'm fine. I applied to you last time to be discharged from the hospital and go back to the base. Let's talk about it later." The man looked away expressionlessly, turned around, and walked toward the ward. Feng Ling followed him quickly, saying, "But it's not necessary to stay in the hospital for 3 more days. The base also has certain standards for the wounded. You've just recovered, and you have to face high-intensity training every day as soon as you go back. If you cough or feel any discomfort because of the intensity of training, the members will think that 11 base lacks humane care for the wounded. It's useless for you to say that you're almost recovered. Listen to the doctor's arrangement and stay for a week." As he spoke, he had walked back to the ward. It was still raining outside. Li Nanheng glanced out and saw that Feng Ling was still thin, although she had nothing to do in the hospital these days. He said lightly, "Xiao Su has prepared 3 meals for you these days. Now Xiao Su is not here. What do you want to eat?" "I'll buy it." "No, boss, I'll just eat the simple meals in the hospital." Li Nanheng raised his eyebrows. "You want to eat the simple meals in the hospital, but it doesn't mean I want to eat them too. I'll go out and buy them. Why bother to come here twice? Tell me, what do you want to eat? Then anything is fine." "Boss, as long as you like it. Fong Ling expressed that she had almost lost all her desires under the oppression of the boss. Okay, wait for me. With that, Li Nanheng turned and walked out. At this time, Fong Ling also glanced at the rain outside the window. She was about to chase out and ask him how to get out. After all, it was raining heavily. However, she had just taken a step when she suddenly paused. Why did she care so much? Was there a need for her to worry about a grown man? An hour later. Fong Ling was originally sitting on the bed waiting for her dinner, but as she waited, she almost fell asleep. Suddenly, she vaguely smelled the fragrance of roasted meat. She opened her eyes abruptly and subconsciously turned to look at the door. Sure enough, the door of the ward opened at this moment, and the tall man returned with 2 warm takeout boxes in his hands. When Li Nanheng placed the takeout on the table by her bedside, she opened the box and looked at the kebabs inside. The meat on the kebabs clearly smelled burnt and smelled especially fragrant. She clearly remembered that the food street she went to with Boss last time was very far away. Did Boss drive directly to the food street? Wasn't he afraid that he couldn't get out of the traffic jam? However, it wasn't hard to tell that Boss used a very fast speed to bring the skewers back after he finished roasting them. The taste didn't change at all. What are you waiting for? Didn't you say you wanted to eat it last time? Li Nanheng casually took out 2 of the best roasted skewers and put them in her hands. He used one hand to pick up the cigarette box that he threw on the table before leaving, threw it on the sofa far away, and then sat down at the table. As if afraid that Fong Ling would be pricked, he quickly took the meat off the skewers, put them all into the clean lunchbox in front of her, and handed her a pair of chopsticks. Eat quickly. Anything that is roasted must be eaten while it's hot. It won't taste good when it's cold. Xiao Su originally had something to do and couldn't come back today, but because of the sudden heavy rain, the matter was temporarily put on hold, so he simply rushed back to the hospital. Just now, he happened to meet Boss Li outside. Now that he was outside the ward and saw this scene through the glass door, his mood instantly became extremely complicated. After all, this was the first time he saw Boss Li deliberately drive to the food street in the troublesome area where traffic was easy to jam. He even carefully asked the boss for an insulated lunchbox and held it all the way back to the car, not caring that it was hot. At that time, he didn't even lock the door, and when he came back, he had been covering it with his coat as if afraid of being wet by the rain. He sent it back to the ward and then helped Fong Ling take off all the meat on the skewers. Not only did he take it off, but Boss seemed to want to feed it directly into Fong Ling's mouth. As someone who saw Boss driving out when he just came back, Xiao Su, who came back to see this scene, felt this was really not in line with Boss Li's usual cold and aloof style. No. Didn't Boss usually hate sickly and delicate beauties the most? Usually, whenever a member of the base asked for leave because he was sick or claimed to be unwell, Boss would roll his eyes impatiently. He really disliked those members who often felt unwell, but right now, Fong Ling was clearly in the hospital and couldn't move her hands or shoulders, but Boss took care of her in every way. Fong Ling, as usual, was no different from usual. She didn't notice Xiao Su's figure flashing by outside and Xiao Su's expression as if his jaw was about to drop off. Because Boss had helped her take off a lot of meat, she was afraid that it would really be cold, so she picked up the chopsticks and began to eat, with a smile on her lips. Boss, aren't you going to eat? Hearing this, Li Nanheng turned his head to glance at her. Because he saw that the corner of the boy's mouth was accidentally stained with cumin, he bent down to wipe it for her. However, when his hand was about to touch her, Fong Ling instinctively dodged slightly. Li Nanheng's brows moved, and he reached out to wipe it again. The man's fingertips instantly swept across the boy's lips. Fong Ling raised her eyes to look at him, and Li Nanheng's fingers also stiffened in an instant. It was clearly an incredibly warm and soft touch, but it made him itch from his fingertips to his heart. In an instant, the man's voice also turned cold. He withdrew his hand, took out a tissue, and threw it in front of her. Wipe it yourself. Chapter 827. Feng Ling wiped her mouth with a tissue and glanced at him. She didn't understand what was wrong with Boss Li. Why did this man seem to be in a bad mood? It was strange. In just a few minutes, Feng Ling was attracted by the pile of meat in front of her. She ate one bite after another happily. It seemed that this was the most delicious food she had eaten since she was a child, except for the food in the base cafeteria. Feng Ling didn't expect her appetite to be so good. After eating more than half of the food he bought, the man suddenly moved the lunchbox in front of her away. The chopsticks in Feng Ling's hand froze in the air and she looked at him in confusion. Boss? You eat so much at one time. Aren't you afraid of indigestion? Boss, you bought so much food. Should I eat it all up? There's no need for that. I bought so many so that you can eat more, not so that you can eat all of them. If a vegetarian suddenly eats so much meat in one meal, you might get indigestion and hurt your stomach. What if you blame me for that? The man threw the lunchbox aside with one hand and lifted his eyelids indifferently. At least you can return to the base in 3 days and resume training immediately. Otherwise, you'll have to take a few more days off because of your stomach discomfort. Feng Ling, however, when he mentioned returning to the base for training, Feng Ling felt at ease. It seemed that Boss didn't blame her for her mistake, nor did he intend to stop her from returning to the base. Feng Ling obediently gave up the plan to eat so much meat and got up to drink water. Seeing her so obedient, Li Nanheng was very satisfied. After all, she was a member of his team. It was better to be obedient than to make trouble everywhere and be unruly. This was the most intuitive thought in Li Nanheng's heart. After all, the skewers were more or less salty. A glass of water was not enough, so Feng Ling took her own cup and turned to the water dispenser to pour a glass of warm water and drink a few mouthfuls. When she was about to put down the cup, she suddenly heard Li Nanheng's voice. How is the water temperature? Feng Ling subconsciously held the cup and glanced at him. It's not bad. It's not hot or cold. It's just right. Li Nanheng raised his eyebrows and curled his lips slightly. He said nonchalantly, I happen to be thirsty. Bring it over and let me have a few mouthfuls. Hearing his words, Feng Ling fell silent for a moment. She clearly felt that this was wrong, but since they were both men, and Boss didn't have a fixed cup here, he already said that he wanted to use her cup. He had no intention of treating her as an outsider. If she insisted on taking a disposable paper cup, Boss might lecture her again. Feng Ling was conflicted for a moment. She felt that she had stayed in the hospital for too long and was too free. She was actually conflicted. She walked over and was about to hand him the glass. Li Nanheng pressed her hand, lowered his head, and took a sip of water from the place where she had just touched. The man's cold and indescribably charming face made Feng Ling feel uncomfortable. She felt as though her hair was about to stand up, and her ears were filled with the man's words. Feng Mingzhu was not his fiancé. He had no fiancé. He wouldn't listen to his family's arrangements and marry a random woman. Why did she suddenly think of these words? Feng Ling was about to pull her hand back, but the man clearly hadn't drunk enough. He pressed her hand and continued to press his lips against the edge of the cup she had just drunk. After drinking all the remaining water in the cup, he let go of her hand. The water temperature is not bad. When the man let go of her hand, he indifferently glanced at the water dispenser not far away. What's in the water dispenser in the hospital? What's in it? Feng Ling hadn't returned to her senses and asked blankly. The man glanced at her meaningfully. I'm not sure, but this water is a little sweet. Is it sweet? Feng Ling smacked her lips suspiciously. After a while, she said, no, it just tastes like normal water. Seeing that Li Nanheng didn't speak, Feng Ling's heart inexplicably trembled. She couldn't tell what she felt, but she instinctively avoided his gaze, turned to the water dispenser, and took half a glass of water. She took another sip, then put down the cup, turned around, and licked the water droplets that fell from her lips, saying, it still tastes very normal. Boss was probably implying that the water was spiked with some kind of medicine. Every member of the base should be vigilant. If someone had drugged the water dispenser in her ward, it seemed that she would have to investigate the doctors and nurses who often came and went here. But there was no problem with the taste, and looking at Boss Li's expression, it didn't seem to mean what she thought. Feng Ling couldn't help licking her lips again. Boss? Li Nanheng looked at the boy's rare confused expression and plain face, and the way she licked her lips from time to time, which was particularly seductive. He actually had an impulse to go over and kiss her. Li Nanheng instantly withdrew his gaze, turned his head to the window, looked at the rain outside with his deep eyes, and then looked at the time, saying, Xiao Su just came back. I met him outside. He is still staying in the lounge tonight. I'm in the ward. When Feng Ling heard that Boss was going to stay in her ward again, she couldn't help glancing in the direction of the bathroom. However, when Li Nanheng turned back and saw her expression, he immediately said coldly, Do you think I will still take a shower in your bathroom? Do you think I really like to be seen by others? Don't even think about it. Feng Ling cursed in her heart, Boss, I don't mean that, I took a shower before coming back and just changed my clothes. That's all for tonight. The man's voice was indifferent and cold. But it was really not comfortable to sleep on this sofa last time, so I was called over by Xiao Su. Now that Xiao Su is back, I don't even have a normal place to rest. Feng Ling subconsciously pointed to her hospital bed, but when she remembered that Boss said she was cursing him to sleep in the hospital bed last time, she just pointed with her finger and didn't speak. Li Nanheng sharply glanced in the direction of her finger. You want me to sleep in your bed? Feng Ling smiled. If Boss doesn't mind this as a hospital bed, of course. Li Nanheng turned to look at her hospital bed thoughtfully, got up, and suddenly walked over. After circling around the bed, he looked at the size of the bed seriously and said indifferently, It's just sleeping. I don't mind, but isn't it too crowded for the two of us to sleep in this bed? Sleep with the two of them? Did he mean that he wanted to sleep with her? Chapter 828. Boss, this bed is indeed too crowded for two people. I can sleep on the sofa. He really wanted to repeat the same old trick, but it seemed like this sentence had never had any effect in the past. Before Feng Ling could say the words on the tip of her tongue, Li Nanheng had already laid down, patted the empty space on the other side of the bed twice, and turned his head to look at her. Come here, lie down, and have a try. Feng Ling didn't move. Why are you standing there? Lie down and see if it's too crowded. If it's too crowded, I'll continue to sleep on the sofa. The man's voice was flat but firm. Since he had said so, Feng Ling glanced at the empty space next to him and sat on the edge of the bed. However, as soon as she sat down, before she had time to decide whether to lie flat or on her side, her arm was suddenly pulled hard from behind, and she suddenly fell back unprepared. The moment she fell into the man's arms, Feng Ling rushed to get up, but the man steadied her body and pressed her to the empty space on the edge of the bed without saying anything. Feng Ling immediately lay motionless on the bed as if petrified. The man beside her stretched out his arms to test the distance. At the same time, he reached over her body and touched the side of her bed. Finally, he commented, Not bad. It's not too crowded to sleep two people. Feng Ling felt that she might have been a little too cautious in recent days, so she could only remain silent and did not say much. When Li Nanheng sat up, she still lay in the same position and looked sideways at the man next to her. All right, let's sleep like this tonight. When Nanheng got up, he pressed the bed under him. The softness of this bed is not bad. Last time I slept on the sofa for a whole night, and my back hurt for 2 days. With that, he got up to get a pack of cigarettes and a lighter, and said, If you're tired, go to sleep first. I'll go out for a smoke and come back. Feng Ling looked out of the window, the rain had stopped, and replied, Okay. The boy's voice was particularly soft. Li Nanheng, who was about to go out, suddenly paused, looked back at her, turned the silver lighter in his hand, and then turned to walk out. While Boss Lee went out to smoke, Feng Ling hurriedly got up, locked the door from the inside, and rushed into the bathroom to take a shower. She had wrapped the chest cloth around her body for a day, and just now she vaguely felt a little sweaty. If she didn't take a shower now, she would probably be unable to fall asleep because of the sticky feeling on her body. Based on her understanding of Boss Lee, she knew that he wouldn't smoke for too long or too short, and Xiao Su also returned to the hospital today. They would probably meet outside. The two men would go out to smoke and chat for at least 10 minutes. She would take a quick shower in these 10 minutes. 5 minutes to take a shower, 3 minutes to wrap the chest cloth, and 1 minute to put on clothes. Sure enough, in less than 10 minutes, when Feng Ling opened the bathroom door, she heard the familiar footsteps of a man approaching. In case Boss found out that she had locked the door, she quickly rushed over to open the lock inside, and then turned back to the bathroom to put the chest cloth and clothes she had just changed into the bottom of the laundry bag. When she was sure that she would not be found out, the door had already been opened. Li Nanheng bought a glass bottle of hot milk in the supermarket downstairs of the hospital. As soon as he entered the door, he heard the sound in the bathroom. Feng Ling seemed to have just taken a shower, and he could smell the shower gel wafting out of the bathroom. The man glanced at Feng Ling's wet hair hanging on her forehead and then glanced at the boy's cheeks, which were much more tender than usual after taking a shower. He wanted to restrain himself, but he couldn't help looking down. He glanced at the collar of the hospital gown that the boy had buttoned up to the top and didn't see anything he wanted to see, so he withdrew his gaze expressionlessly, walked to the bed, and put down the bottle of hot milk in his hand. I bought it on the way back. Drink some before going to bed. It can help you sleep. Feng Ling picked up a dry towel to dry her hair and poked her head out of the bathroom door to say, "Boss, I sleep very well. Drink it yourself." "Really?" Li Nanheng looked back at her and sneered. "Last time I stayed here for a night, I heard you turning over at night. Are you sure you sleep well?" "Feng Ling, isn't that because you, the great Buddha, came to my ward to sleep?" Feng Ling put down the towel, feeling that if she really slept in the same bed with Boss Lee tonight, she probably wouldn't be able to sleep. "Okay, I'll drink it right away." After speaking, she continued to dry her hair. When her hair was half dry and only a little wet, she casually shook her hair and walked out. When she picked up the bottle of milk, she found that it was still hot and immediately looked up at Li Nanheng. "By the way, I asked someone in the supermarket to heat it up. The temperature is just right. Drink it." The man unbuttoned his coat, and after speaking, he swaggered to the bed, reluctantly leaving half of the space for her to go to bed. Feng Ling opened the lid, took a sip, and then smacked her lips. Li Nanheng had closed his eyes. There were a lot of things waiting for him to deal with when he returned to the Li Corporation during the day. He was exhausted and just wanted to sleep now. Hearing this guy smacking his lips, he closed his eyes and asked, "Is it good?" "Not bad. Boss, you bought sweet milk. It's very delicious." "Okay." The man seemed to be very satisfied, but he was also very tired. He closed his eyes and responded lightly, turned over, and fell asleep. Seeing that the man fell asleep in her bed in less than 10 seconds, Feng Ling sat by the side and drank milk, wondering whether she should go up to sleep or not. At the same time, she lowered her head to check her clothes and chest wrapping cloth. After drinking the milk, Feng Ling gently put down the bottle, turned around, and was about to return to the sofa when the man on the bed suddenly turned over at this moment. The man closed his eyes and said hoarsely, "Come to sleep." Feng Ling was silent. He woke up. She looked back at the man on the bed. "Boss, I'm not good at sleeping. I'm afraid it will affect the quality of your sleep." The man didn't speak anymore, but turned sideways, leaving more space on the bed. He didn't talk nonsense with her, but obviously asked her to go up to sleep. Feng Ling walked back, and when lying down, she raised her hand and touched her chest casually. After making sure that she wouldn't be discovered if she didn't touch it carefully, She lay stiffly beside him. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.